Chapter 1571. Little Meat sneered, not concealing her ridicule at all. They were just two puppies. Did they really think that their noses were sharp enough? This Zhong Wu Ho estate, if I let you see it, then you can see it. If I don't let you see it, then you can only be two blind people with your eyes wide open. However, at the thought that one day she would be forced by two little paparazzi to cover her tracks and aura, her expression turned gloomy. As he looked at Qin Yu, his expression darkened. I already said, don't even think about asking me about that woman. Even if you did, it would be useless. Qin Yu frowned. He thought for a moment and then said, I don't ask about the past and I don't investigate the cause and effect. I only want to know what I should do to make her remember me. Do you have any ideas? Meaty shook her head and firmly refused no. However, her eyes flickered, and it was unknown what she was thinking. She suddenly said, It's not like you only have me behind you. Since you can't cling on to me, why don't you beg someone else? These words weren't pleasant to hear, but this was the truth. Qin Yu's expression was calm, without the slightest bit of anger. He knew who Meaty was talking about, but it was too late to hide now, so he really didn't want to take the initiative to summon her. Little Meaty seemed to see through Qin Yu's thoughts. She sneered, Sometimes I think you are very smart, but sometimes I think you are really stupid. She tapped her fingers on the table. Her movements were a bit strange, as if she had learned them from Qin Yu. That person, what boundary and level is she at? Do you really think that she can't sense anything that happens to her? Humph, humph, humph. What you're doing now is merely burying your head in the sand. Qin Yu's complexion changed. Just now His Excellency ruler had been in a state of deep sleep in front of him, as if he had been sleeping for many years. As a result, he was able to take advantage of a loophole and was able to live in peace during this period of time. Qin Yu took a deep breath and a thoughtful look crossed his face. Then he suddenly glanced at the meat across from him. Your Excellency, it seems that you wish to see me summon the Sovereign Lord. Ro sneered. So what if you can tell? I didn't intend to hide it from you. She pointed at the door. I've already pointed you in the right direction. Whether you're willing to try it or not, it's up to you. Take care, I won't see you out. It was only after Qin Yu left the courtyard doors that he reacted. This was his home, okay? But now, he was not in the mood to argue with her. Although the one in Meaty's body had many problems, one of its few merits was that it didn't like to lie. Previously, it was because of this that Qin Yu had used some methods to find out Yunqing's identity. Moreover, if she said she couldn't say it, then she couldn't say it. She clung to this point and didn't make up some random excuse to fool Qin Yu. In that case, there was a high chance that this sentence was true. The sovereign and Yunqing, or rather, Liao Shi, had a close relationship. As for Liao Shi, when he left the abyss and returned to the vast Yang world, Qin Yu had already asked His Excellency the ruler. In other words, for some unknown reason, she had lied to Qin Yu. This could clearly support Qin Yu's judgment. The Lord Ruler was related to Liao Shi. After receiving benefits from others, not only did he fail to fulfill his promise, but he also ended up eating into his own stomach. No matter how the heavens were said, it was not right. Thus, Qin Yu had a guilty conscience. He had been avoiding His Excellency ruler, unwilling to face him. But for Liao Shi, he was willing to go against his conscience. Of course, there was another reason, and that was that if the situation was as Meaty said, then His Excellency ruler might have already noticed everything and was just silently watching from the sidelines. Then, the longer he remained silent, the heavier she would sneer in her heart. Sooner or later, she would have to stab him with her blade. So he might as well throw caution to the wind. In the room, Qin Yu's thoughts stirred. The rules of space and time slightly twisted. In the back residence, Meaty's eyes brightened, revealing a look of anticipation. Then she lifted a hand and gently pointed forwards, completely concealing the sound that Qin Yu was making so that the 2/4 claws wouldn't sense it. For now, she only told Qin Yu that she didn't lie. But she never lied. For instance, the two fourth claws thought they had everything under their control. But in her eyes, they were two old sugar canes that could be gnawed on at any moment, blind and blind. Qin Yu took a deep breath and spread out his arms. The phantom of a sun and moon appeared above his head. Then there was no then. As his cultivation rose and his strength grew, Qin Yu could faintly feel that his summoning had found its target. But for some unknown reason, His Excellency Ruler was like air, not responding at all. Responding. After trying for a long time, Qin Yu frowned. He let out a deep breath, a helpless expression on his face. If His Excellency Ruler didn't respond, then there was nothing he could do. After all, this was a summoning ceremony, not a method to forcefully imprison someone. In the back, residence Meaty, who was helping Qin Yu conceal his aura, had a gloomy expression. It was clear she was in an extremely bad mood. She endured it for several moments, but in the end, she found it hard to dispel the anger in her chest. She clenched her teeth and cursed. "You, old woman, you sure are thick-skinned enough." She had lived for countless years, so she certainly knew how to curse. Not only did she know, but her cursing skills weren't bad either. In that moment just now, there were countless vicious words swirling around in her heart, but for some reason she couldn't speak. This caused the unfathomably powerful, mysterious existence hidden in space-time to feel even worse. She couldn't even breathe happily. Nothing came of it. Even if she knew that His Excellency Ruler knew about Liao Shi, she still avoided him and could only temporarily set it aside. Luckily, Qin Yu had already found Liao Shi, so there was no need to be too anxious. Second, there was a time limit to hiding. He didn't believe that His Excellency Ruler could pretend to be air forever. In the distance, in a half-abandoned crack between the heavens and earth, the sound of gnashing teeth rang out. Although it was said to be half-abandoned, it wasn't because it had experienced a calamity or some great change. This was because the crack between the heavens and earth was a place where living beings and inanimate objects couldn't enter. When His Excellency Ruler barged into it and used it as a resting place to conceal his aura, this place could be considered half-abandoned and no longer possessed the complete characteristics of a crack between the heavens and earth. "You little wench, you are ruthless. You brought a perfectly good pot, and yet you directly threw it onto me. Just you wait, this isn't over. I'll remember this and see how I flip out." After being forcefully woken up and fuming with anger, His Excellency Ruler was in an extremely foul mood. He rubbed his messy hair. It was unknown where some starlight came from, but as it sprinkled down on her, she didn't seem sloppy at all. Instead, she seemed like a dreamy fairy. It was truly a kind of chaotic beauty. His Excellency Ruler thought for a moment, but before he could think of a way to retaliate, his eyelids began to struggle. He was so tired that he couldn't open his eyes at all. "Just you wait. Wait for me to wake up. Then I'll let you experience what it means to be fierce." As he forced himself to say these words, the Excellency Ruler's voice rose up like a kitten under the warm sun. Although there was a sound, it was extremely cute. The Grand Court meeting arrived as scheduled. The rules were extremely strict. In the imperial capital, as long as one had the qualifications to enter the imperial palace and meet with the ruler, they had to wear court clothes and participate on time. Being late or absent was a taboo. Even if there were special circumstances, they still had to report ahead of time and obtain permission from the Ministry of Personnel before reporting to His Majesty. Only after receiving a final reply could they ask for leave. Luckily, the Grand Court meeting was held twice a year. Otherwise, the high and mighty officials of the court would likely suffer. Not to mention anything else. Just wearing a neat set of court clothes was more complicated the higher one's status was. Qin Yu was deep in the night. There was still a long time before the ninth sun rose, but he had already been woken up by a maid. Luckily, he had been thinking about how to arrange matters regarding Yunqing, so he didn't have to suffer the pain of being woken up in the middle of the night. Inner clothes, outer clothes, watch clothes, cloud patterns, tiger and wolf patterns, purple marquee robes, hanging ornaments, cloud boots. There were dozens of different types, and each one was carefully chosen. What he wore had to conform to etiquette and regulations. He couldn't go overboard in the slightest. There were 3 or 4 maids surrounding Chinyu, their foreheads dripping with sweat. But a fragrant fragrance wafted through the air, not annoying at all. At some unknown time, little Meaty had arrived with several maids. She glanced at Chinyu, who was surrounded by the maids and had his arms outstretched. She curled her lips and lightly snorted. The maids in the residence already knew that their madam's status in the residence was extraordinary. She was incomparable to ordinary women in the capital, so they weren't too respectful to the Marquis. They all lowered their heads and didn't say anything, afraid that they would be implicated. Another hour passed. He put on the purple gold crown on his head, and his black hair was neatly combed. Although his current appearance could only be considered ordinary, he still didn't look like much. But as the saying goes, clothes make the man, horse makes the saddle. With this set of Marquis court attire on him, he immediately looked a bit more noble and dignified. Meaty's eyes brightened. Chinyu's disguise might be able to fool others, but it was useless in front of her. This boy had tidied himself up a bit, and he still looked a bit like a dog. When Chinyu opened his eyes, she had returned to her previous lazy appearance. This is the first grand court meeting. Marquis, be careful and don't violate any taboos. As he spoke, he walked forward. At some point in time, he was holding something in his hand. It was a jade pendant, pure white. There were no cloud patterns or carvings on the surface, so there wasn't anything strange about it. Marquis, take this jade. When you return, remember to return it to me. Hearing this, Chinyu's fingers tightened. He smiled. Thank you, madam. Meaty rolled her eyes. Chinyu laughed several times. For her to appear here was already an indication of many things, so there was no need to care about such minor details. Outside the door, Wang Datu respectfully said, General, we should leave. Chinyu turned and walked away. Without looking back, he waved his hand, the white jade twining around his fingers. Madam, rest assured that I will return soon. The maids all revealed looks of envy, although there were times when they felt that the relationship between the Marquis and the madam was a bit strange. But from what they saw today, it seemed that the relationship between them was quite good. It was unknown when the 2 old 4-clawed men had appeared in the courtyard. They were still as listless as before. Their bodies were hunched, like 2 old dogs that were curled up in a ball. But in the darkness of the night, the eyes of the 2 old 4-clawed men seemed to shine. They occasionally swept their eyes around, lightning flashing in their eyes. Chinyu strode into the courtyard. He faintly smiled and cupped his hands together. I'll have to trouble you two. One of the old 4-clawed men nodded. As for the other one, he didn't respond at all. Chinyu didn't care. After greeting them, he stood up and walked outside. One on the left and one on the right, the 2 old 4-clawed men followed behind him. Wang Data knew where they came from, so he took the initiative to bring his men back several steps. In his words, if it was on the battlefield, then there were many of us brothers, and we could certainly protect the general. But in the imperial capital, not only were there many bastards, but most of them were ruthless and tyrannical in their strength. Moreover, there were too few of them, so they could only serve as foils. There wasn't anything to be disheartened about. The country bumpkins of the border army had a good understanding of reality. So, when they first arrived at the imperial capital, they didn't have much confidence in themselves. They felt that the people of the imperial capital were truly extraordinary. Once the general was bestowed the title of Marquis of Loyal Marshal, he would become a hot and powerful figure in the imperial capital. At that time, Wang Sen would even dare to put on airs in Li Zhou's temporary imperial residence. Little Meaty watched Chinyu leave. A smile lifted the corners of her lips, but it disappeared in a flash. She yawned and said, "Stop looking. You sluts are doomed to have no chance. Hurry up and disperse." She prepared to go back and sleep. As for Qin Yu's safety, she had even given him the jade, so he would naturally be fine. Little Meaty was confident in this. As he stepped out of the residence, Qin Yu frowned. He glanced around at the darkness where the light couldn't reach. But behind him, the two old four-clawed men had calm expressions. He thought for a moment and then ignored them. In the eastern city, where the vermilion flowers gathered, the vast majority of mansions had the qualifications to participate in the super meeting. Thus, the normally quiet street was unexpectedly bustling with activity as the sky darkened. As Qin Yu walked towards the carriage, he became aware of several gazes from the surroundings. Looking back, most of these people were dressed in court attire and cupping their hands in greeting from afar. Compared to the surrounding mansions, the loyal Marshal Marquis mansion was a completely new upstart. But their authority couldn't be faked, and the trust they had in the imperial palace was even more enviable. The various elders of the emperor clans had already chosen to retreat. Although the agreement of 100 years was a secret, those with the qualifications to know would naturally know. Disregarding everything else, at least for the next 100 years, the loyal Marshal Marquis Ningqin's status would be as stable as Mount Tai, and it might even rise further. The matters of the future could be discussed in the future. Right now, he had to maintain good relations with them. Qin Yu cupped his hands together in return. Without exchanging any pleasantries, he bent down and pushed open the door to the carriage. The two old four-clawed men were still standing on the left and right. The carriage driver paled. He gulped and cracked his whip. "Pa!" The carriage wheels turned and drove towards the imperial palace. At this time, a light breeze blew through the night, carrying with it a faint smell of blood. It tumbled on the street for a moment before dissipating from sight. Two corpses lay not too far away, their eyes wide open. The old Yi family's iron guard only revealed a pair of eyes beneath his helmet. His eyes were icy cold, without the slightest fluctuation of emotion. His figure was like a fox. His feet were silent as he passed through the darkness, rapidly chasing after the carriage. And at the same time the other iron guards, as well as the other 9, walked through the darkness, completing their bloody harvest. At today's imperial capital's grand court meeting, it was destined that there would be a great storm. Chapter 1572. His Majesty is fishing. The Yi family's old patriarch had a calm expression. He wore a plain robe and sat on a sandalwood chair, quietly drinking tea. Of course not. The old patriarch didn't have the qualifications to enter the imperial palace to participate in the court meeting. Many years ago, when he returned to the capital, he received a decree from His Majesty. The old general was old and didn't need to attend the court meeting. To say that he was old was really old. The old patriarch had assisted 3 generations of emperors and was an important minister of 3 dynasties. Who knew how many people were hoping that the old man would give up and return to the West as soon as possible. With a stomp of his leg and his last breath, he would be gone with a plop so that others would have more time to breathe. But the old patriarch was still alive and well. Although he was a bit withered, as long as he was alive, he would be the Yi family's stabilizing force, a military god that no one dared to provoke. The one standing in front of him was a pitiful fellow who was missing a leg and a hand. When he woke up after fighting with the barbarians in the border army, he had become like this. He didn't cry or make a fuss. After he recovered from his injuries, he would follow the old patriarch back to the imperial capital. These years he had lived in seclusion in the Yi family's old residence. There weren't many people who had seen him, but the direct descendants of the Yi family all knew that the old patriarch had a brilliant strategist who was missing a leg and a hand. These years, every major event would be discussed with him. He was one of the few people who could influence the old patriarch's thoughts. The two sat across from each other. This pitiful fellow who was missing a leg and a hand, as well as half of his body that had been neatly cut off, must have had a hard time surviving. But he clearly didn't feel that he was pitiful. His eyes flowed with a faint light. Yi Bohu is a smart man. Otherwise, you wouldn't have failed to gain the upper hand in your repeated battles over the years. He must have seen that His Majesty was fishing. Even if he made a move, he wouldn't have used the Yi family's strength. The old patriarch put down his teacup and faintly smiled. That's right. But this time His Majesty didn't want to fish Yi Bohu. Taking a step back, even if Yi Bohu was stupid enough to go into battle naked, His Majesty would still let go of the hook. After all, more haste makes less speed. This matter needs to be done slowly. It's not perfect, but it's best to minimize some losses. The military counselor, who was missing a limb, said lightly, His Majesty wants a reason so that he can continue to act against the Yi family after the storm in the capital has passed. Pausing for a moment, he frowned. But besides that, I always feel that there are other reasons. After all, Our Majesty's plans have always been grand. If he continues to target the Yi family just to get a groundless pain, isn't that a little too petty? The old man glanced at the darkness of the night, illuminated by the lanterns outside the courtyard. If the Yi family doesn't make a move, there won't be many people who would dare to kill the Golden General in the capital. The eyes of the military advisor, which was missing a limb, burst with a bright light. Hui Chui Pavilion. He looked up. Your Majesty doesn't have a reason to fall out with them. So, the only possible reason is to take advantage of this opportunity to make a deal. For instance, killing them with a borrowed knife. The old man smiled and nodded. Although Yuan Kuei had lost an arm and a leg and had become a cripple struggling at death's door, in his eyes, Yuan Kuei was still a rare and extremely intelligent person. His Majesty's plans were naturally far-sighted. Today's storm in the capital was only a prelude to a thunderous storm in the future. There was never a lack of intelligent people in the world. But beneath an overt plot, everything was vast and mighty. Like a great river sweeping up, there was no room for choice. Yi Bohu could see that His Majesty was fishing, but even so, he could only follow His Majesty's intentions. Otherwise, did he really think that if the Yi family was obedient and didn't move at all, His Majesty would be lenient? Of course not. So, even though he knew this, he still had to move forward. Yi Bohu had always respected His Majesty. Today, in the darkness of the night, he felt even more respect. He was neatly dressed in the court robes of a first-class marquis, with the flood dragon emblem of the Empire's military commander. His momentum was boundless, as if he could swallow mountains and rivers. Marshal, it's time to leave. Yi Bohu turned around and walked out with large strides. His expression was calm, firm, and steady. In a game with His Majesty, his chances of victory weren't high. But he still had to try. What if there was a pleasant surprise? For instance, if General Ningqin really did die today, in the darkness of the Grand Court meeting. At that time, His Majesty in the Imperial Palace, the old Yi family's old turtle, as well as those withered rotten trees that feared death, would surely have wonderful expressions on their faces. The carriage was supported by an array formation, so there weren't any bumps as it traveled. The carriage was quiet and tranquil. As today's bait, it would be a lie if Qin Yu said that he wasn't annoyed at all. But no matter how annoyed he was, he still chose to fully cooperate. After all, the existence of the Yi family, whether it was from a personal grudge or a righteous point of view, was an existence that he had to eradicate. The entire journey was quiet, but Qin Yu was well aware that in this quiet, the slaughter had already begun. The old Yi family's 10 iron guards were truly astonishing. Those ghostly assassins were found and killed one at a time, not giving them a chance to approach the carriage. The 2 old guards sat on the driver's left and right. Their heads were drooped, as if they had woken up too early and were exhausted. Calculating the time, the residents and the Imperial Palace had already crossed more than half the distance. In just a moment, the carriage would arrive at the Imperial Palace. At that time, today's assassination attempt would become a joke. The Imperial Palace was the absolute home field of the Western Wasteland Great Emperor. No one dared to provoke his dignity. If they dared to do so, they would undoubtedly die. There was simply no chance of success. The place where the destiny of a country gathered, was tyrannical and tyrannical. So, if they wanted to kill Chinyu, they could only do it before the carriage arrived at the imperial palace. The red rope wrapped around his fingertips. The white jade in his hand released a cool feeling, making Chinyu's consciousness unprecedentedly clear. Then, an incomparably powerful intuition appeared in his mind. The other party's true killing move hadn't arrived yet. Suddenly, there was a stuffy cough in the darkness, followed by the sound of something falling to the ground. Chinyu turned his head, a grim look in his eyes. This was the first time that the old Yi family's iron guards had been knocked to the ground. Although Chinyu couldn't see the specific details, the image of a tall and sturdy figure that had fallen to the ground appeared in his mind. Beneath the visor, the only eye that could be seen was shock, anger, and unwillingness. Finally, the light faded away, leaving behind only darkness. Looking down at the white jade, Chinyu guessed that it should be because of it, but this definitely wasn't its full effect. This mysterious existence that hid space and time naturally wouldn't make such a simple move. Beside the carriage driver, the two fourth claws opened their eyes at the same time. In their dim and turbid eyes, it was like a thunderstorm had broken through the layers of clouds, revealing their bodies to the world. Drive the carriage properly. Don't worry about anything else. One of the fourth claws said in a soft voice. His voice was gloomy and slippery, like a viper coiled around his neck, hissing and flicking out its tongue. The carriage driver nodded vigorously. He gulped, his complexion becoming increasingly pale. There was another dull thud, followed by the sound of a round object rolling around. Like this, an armored head rolled in front of the carriage. Pa! His head exploded, and a mass of red and white matter splashed everywhere. Each drop was like an arrow that had been shot from a drawn bow. The fourth claws chuckled. He lifted a hand and grasped forwards. Space suddenly twisted, turning into an invisible barrier. Bang, bang, bang. Dull thumping sounds rang out one after another, striking the surface of the barrier. Ripples spread out, but they couldn't penetrate it in the least. Don't just stand there, hurry up. It's getting late. We can't delay the Marquis from entering the palace. Fourth Claw lifted his head and looked at the dark night sky. His eyes were filled with mockery. When I was playing tricks and playing tricks, you didn't even know which man you were hiding under. Luring the tiger away from the mountain wasn't a good move. The old Yi family's iron guards were sent out by that old man on his own initiative. Even if they all die, that is a matter of the old Yi family. It has nothing to do with us. In the darkness, a thin figure carrying a headless corpse looked at the fourth claws from afar. He frowned. He casually tossed aside the iron guard's corpse and turned to leave, his figure disappearing into the darkness. The fourth claws arched an eyebrow. He didn't think that the other would leave just like that. When the head exploded, the red and white matter had splashed out in all directions. This was only a bit of strength left behind after he killed someone. To have such power, it was enough to prove the strength of this assassin. When the two sides looked at each other, the fourth claws originally thought that there would be a battle, but he frowned. His face did not relax, but rather became more serious. Haha, interesting. Today is really interesting. The other fourth claws chuckled. He stuck out his tongue and licked his lips, his eyes filled with heat. Humph. Be careful. I don't want to have to collect your corpse later. The fourth claws that attacked first spoke with an indifferent tone. No need. If I die, I'll leave my corpse in the wilderness. I've done too many shady things in my life. If I die, I'll vent the anger of the heavens. Perhaps I'll have a chance to reincarnate in my next life. Good. The two fourth claws became tranquil again, but their backs were straight and the wrinkles on their faces were much less than before. A powerful aura was drawn, but not released. It was like lava raging underground, ready to soar into the sky at any moment. At this moment, not too far from the imperial palace, they could already sense a terrifying aura in the air. Like mercury pouring into the world, it was difficult to breathe. Even moving one's hands and feet was difficult. There was a powerhouse, an absolute powerhouse. A plain robe. He walked in the darkness, his sleeves clear like the wind, his shoulders shouldering the mountains and rivers, like a great sun descending. He was so bright that one couldn't look at him directly. The two fourth claws narrowed their eyes at the same time. They looked at the middle-aged guest that was walking towards them. The eyesores of the old Yi family iron guards had now sunk into the dark mud. Some had already died, some were entangled, and their cards were completely wasted. There was no way for them to entangle the middle-aged guest in front of them. This was also an overt plot. "Mr. Zhou, I didn't think that you would come today," the fourth claws said with interest. But now his complexion was very dull, dark and gloomy. The middle-aged guest's robes fluttered in the wind. His sleeves fluttered in the wind, his expression calm. "Since you too recognize me, will you move aside or will you die?" With a sharp laugh, the fourth claws slapped the carriage. His figure shot out like an arrow. "I have admired Mr. Zhou for a long time, so how could I move aside?" The air was torn apart with an ear-piercing sound. The temperature in the air dropped rapidly. As the fourth claw punched out, an ice dragon suddenly appeared. Its body was covered with bright yellow scales, and there was a royal dragon aura circulating around it. The dragon energy became increasingly vivid. With a loud roar, it opened its mouth and fiercely swallowed. The middle-aged guest had a calm expression. As he saw the ice dragon howl towards him, he lifted a hand and pointed a finger. With a mournful cry and a boundless momentum, it rapidly approached the ice dragon. In front of it, the phantom of a translucent mountain appeared. Although it was a phantom, it released an endless momentum. It was like a towering mountain, unmoving like a great mountain. Although the ice dragon was strong, it could rely on its own strength to shake the heavens and earth. This was no different from striking a stone with an egg. Before the mournful cry fell, there was a heaven-shaking explosion. The mountain phantom didn't even tremble, but the ice dragon had already been smashed into countless pieces. Halfway through, the fourth claws cried out and hurriedly drew back. Like a boulder, he smashed into the ground. With a loud bang, the ground instantly caved in, forming a terrifying crater. Countless cracks appeared around the crater, spreading out in all directions like a spider web. The middle-aged guest frowned. He took a step and shot into the skies. In the next moment, the ground beneath him broke apart. In front of the mountain phantom, the shattered ice dragon shot into the skies. It opened its great mouth, revealing fierce fangs. It was just a hair away from tearing the middle-aged guest to pieces. But this tiny bit of awareness was an insurmountable moat. The middle-aged guest flicked his sleeves, and space suddenly twisted. Like a net, it sucked in the soaring ice dragon. Then space twisted, wildly collapsing and contracting. Angry roars echoed out, turning into pained wails. Finally, the ice dragon that was sucked into the twisting space turned into a white bead, completely lifeless. Puff! The fourth claws spat out a mouthful of blood, his face pale. He lifted a hand and wiped it away. He chuckled. "Mr. Zhou is truly fierce." The middle-aged guest said, "Today I want to kill someone, so I don't have time to waste with you. If you don't move aside, don't blame me for not giving His Majesty face." The fourth claws laughed. "Mr. Zhou's words don't make sense. After you came to the imperial capital, His Majesty has treated you with respect." The middle-aged guest stepped forwards, not giving him a chance to delay for time. The Western Wasteland's imperial capital was the place where the destiny of a country gathered. Even with his cultivation, he was absolutely powerless to resist it. Since he had attacked, he had to kill Marquis Zhongwu in the carriage in the shortest possible time. Bang! With a loud explosion, the fourth claws was sent flying backwards. Blood spurted out from his nose and mouth. But it was unknown what material his robe was made of, but it was still intact. In fact, after being stained with the blood that the fourth claws had spat out, the eyes of the python on his robe brightened, as if it were about to come to life. "Guard the carriage!" The other fourth claws shouted out loud and shot into the skies, blocking the fourth claws that had been sent flying backwards. He coldly sneered, "You can die, and even leave your corpse in the wilderness is fine. But the matter that His Majesty gave us hasn't been completed yet, so you cannot die now." The fourth claws spat out a mouthful of blood. The injured fourth claws diabolically grinned, "I'm fine. I won't die just yet." He looked up, his eyes filled with incomparable hatred as they fell on the middle-aged guest. Pitiful people in the imperial palace. They've lived in the mud for so many years, and now that they can die with a character like Mr. Zhou, they can be considered to have gained some face. The middle-aged guest, Mr. Zhou, remained expressionless, unmoved in the least. He didn't feel any fear, just because the two fourth claws had joined forces. He continued forwards. His feet were steady and calm, as if even 1,000 mountains and 10,000 rivers could be trampled flat. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps, the two fourth claws seemed to withstand a weight of 10,000 tons. It was only by struggling that they didn't fall down. Their eyes flashed with an ominous light. This time, it wasn't just their nose and mouth that were bleeding. Fine cracks began to appear on their exposed skin. Dark red beads of blood appeared from these cracks, gradually seeping into the robe on their bodies. Chapter 1573. The middle-aged guest continued forwards, his tone calm. "Let's not waste any more time. Let me experience the true abilities of the imperial palace's fourth claw." Their bodies were bathed in blood, and their expressions were fierce. The two fourth claws glanced at each other, knowing that today was the deadline. "Since Mr. Zhou thinks highly of us, then we won't disappoint you." Although the celestial silkworm scripture is a law formula that is cultivated by an incomplete person, we feel that there are still some merits to it. "Mr. Zhou, please advise us." With a sharp cry, the python robes on the two fourth claws came to life. It was like a giant mouth that swallowed the two fourth claws. The sound of chewing was accompanied by the tearing of flesh and bone. The two claws of the fourth brother were completely devoured. Thus, the serpent on the robe really came to life. Its body fell heavily to the ground, and it stuck out its tongue and hissed. Its eyes were filled with violence as it stared at the middle-aged man. The celestial silkworm's scripture cultivation method was like a silkworm eating mulberry leaves and spinning silk. It cultivated the set of clothes worn by the fourth claw. After cultivating it, this cultivation method would reach large success. With a single leap, it would become the highly respected fourth claw of the imperial palace. But at the same time, it would also be digging a path to death for itself. Once it risked its life in battle, it would sacrifice itself and use its blood essence and soul as nourishment to awaken the flood serpent on the python robes, allowing it to display its strongest might. Of course, this method was a one-time use. After using it, the fourth claw would die. Its soul would scatter and it wouldn't be able to enter samsara. This was why they were talking about exposing their corpses in the wilderness and asking for a chance to reincarnate in their next life. In truth, after they died, they wouldn't leave behind a corpse, so it was impossible for them to enter samsara. The middle-aged guest, Mr. Zhou, furrowed his eyebrows. It wasn't that he couldn't bear to continue cultivating such a cruel cultivation method, but that only the imperial palace that controlled the destiny of a country would dare to recklessly cultivate it without any worries that there would be evil creatures haunting them. He naturally came prepared today. Moreover, the celestial silkworm scripture in the western wasteland imperial palace wasn't a secret to begin with. Looking at the two flood serpents roaring into the heavens, the middle-aged guest flipped his hand. Like a vast lotus leaf, it covered the entire world. As the saying goes, when the nest is overturned, there are no intact eggs. The entire world was suppressed, so it was naturally difficult for him to escape. The two sin flood serpents held miserably, their enormous bodies crazily thrashing about. However, The ground and space around them were extremely stable, not showing the slightest sign of breaking. It was as if there was an invisible force suppressing everything in the world, including the two of them. Many golden jade characters appeared on the surface of the evil flood dragon's massive body. They did not look eye-catching, but in reality, every one of them was extremely heavy. The pressure caused Niamang's scales to shatter and his flesh to rupture. The incomparably powerful Niamang's body became a bloody mess. In the middle-aged man's eyes, there was some regret and reluctance. But time waited for no man, and he had no time to hesitate. Pa! With a soft sound, a jade tablet hanging from his waist directly shattered into pieces. The golden jade characters on the surface of the evil flood dragon's body shined with light at the same time, branding into its flesh and steaming it. Black mist rose up, and mournful howls came from within. The heavenly silkworm scripture required one to be dressed like a silkworm eating mulberry leaves and spinning silk. But silkworms ate mulberry leaves. What did Lao Sizwa Li, who had cultivated successfully in the palace, eat? This was the true origin of the word cruel. The two Lao Sizwa Li had sacrificed themselves to summon the two evil flood dragons. Now they were on the verge of death. No matter how much they struggled, they would not be able to escape. It wasn't that they weren't strong, but that the middle-aged man, Mr. Zhou, was one of the most terrifying figures in the imperial capital. Huizue Pavilion had been able to move him so easily because the customer had paid them enough. Secondly, they had enough connections to actually find Mr. Zhou's residence and reach an agreement with him. Presumably, His Majesty in the imperial palace would be surprised and even a little disappointed by this. After all, he had originally wanted to recruit this middle-aged man and add another bargaining chip to the Western Desolate. Although he was an abandoned person from the central, desolate, divine continent, his talent and potential were clearly seen by the Western Desolate Emperor, who controlled the fate of the nation. The middle-aged man was an existence that had the qualifications to break through to the Emperor realm. All of this, the middle-aged man in the night was naturally aware of it. However, he didn't regret his actions today. The woman on the sickbed was the crux of his love, and also someone he had to save. He took a step forward and appeared outside the carriage. The middle-aged man's expression was calm. There was no guilt or killing intent as he pointed forward. Protect the general. Big Head and the other border soldiers surrounding the carriage had long since been stunned by the slaughter in front of them. Their faces were all pale and their legs trembled. But when the middle-aged man flew over, he shouted and unsheathed his blade, jumping out without hesitation. It would be a lie to say that he wasn't afraid. However, his mind was blank and he didn't have time to think. Our general, of course, but we can't die here. As for whether or not we can block the attack and how useful it will be, Big Head didn't have time to think. In any case, the lives of us border army bumpkins are cheap. If we die, then so be it. We just need to repay the general's kindness. In reality, it wasn't of much use. Although Big Head and the other border soldiers weren't afraid of death, they were sent flying before they could even charge forward. They spat out blood and rolled on the ground. Although they were battered and exhausted, they weren't truly fatal. Although the middle-aged man had left his hometown and became an exiled person, he still abided by the precepts of a gentleman and didn't recklessly kill. Of course, if he wanted to kill someone, then that was a different matter. As the saying goes, a gentleman does what he says, and what he doesn't, it all depended on his mood. These words were definitely nonsense, but it was a catchphrase that Junior Master often used in the past. Because of this, the elders of the academy had a headache, but they couldn't do anything about it. After all, Junior Master was the strongest person in the academy. This was something that his teacher had personally admitted. If Junior Master was here today, what would the scene be like? Perhaps he wouldn't be in a hurry to kill. Instead, he would wait for the imperial palace to react. He might even force out the emperor realm overseeing the imperial capital. Then he would fight to his heart's content and see if the sword in his hand could cut apart the city. The middle-aged man's eyes brightened slightly. Then he revealed a trace of disappointment. In this life, he would never have the chance to see Junior Master use his sword again. He shook his head and restrained his thoughts. Since he couldn't compare to Junior Master, then he had to kill as soon as possible. Thinking of this, the middle-aged man's eyes became even more solemn. His finger glowed as he pointed. The tip of his finger was like a sword. Apart from the coachman, there were no other obstacles in front of the carriage. Before the finger landed, a terrifying pressure crashed down on the mind like a raging river, intending to shatter the soul. The coachman's face turned even paler. The fear in his eyes suddenly disappeared. His eyes were serious as he looked at the finger. The long whip in his hand shattered inch by inch. There was a sword hidden in the bamboo handle. As he raised his sword, it was as if he was stirring up a river. The surging sword intent was like a stormy sea, and it burst out in a hearty manner. The middle-aged man frowned, surprise in his eyes. He didn't expect that the unremarkable coachman in front of him was a peerless sword cultivator. But as soon as he pointed, the sword was unsheathed and there was no turning back. Thus, the finger moved even faster, colliding with the tip of the sword like a bolt of lightning. The middle-aged man's eyebrows furrowed even tighter. His robes suddenly fluttered, as if a massive amount of gas had been injected into them. His figure floated backwards, his long sleeves fluttering in the wind. He was like an immortal passing through the night, giving off an extraordinary aura. He quietly landed on the ground. The middle-aged man looked at the coachman, or more accurately, at the short sword in his hand. It was said to be short because the sword wasn't long, but the sword intent contained within was so long that it couldn't be calculated. Simply put, from here to there it was longer than the heavens. What is the name of this sword? The coachman's face turned even paler, like clean high-grade rice paper. But his breathing was still long and gentle. The sword's name is Winding River. It uses an ancient river as its foundation and was refined with a transcendent supernatural power. For it to be passed down to me is already a bit of a disgrace. The middle-aged man nodded, agreeing with these words. The coachman's cultivation realm was high, and he was a peerless sword cultivator in the world. But if the sword in his hand was included, then he really wasn't worthy of it. It wasn't that he was weak, but that this sword was far too strong. This was especially true after it was placed in the western wasteland imperial palace, tempered by the destiny of the nation and nourished for many years. It had been silent for thousands of years, but today, with a single sword strike, the sword energy was so long that it could split apart the heavens. Since it could even split apart the heavens, how could it not split apart people? After all, no matter how strong the middle-aged man, Mr. Zhou, was, he didn't dare to compare with the heavens. If you were strong enough, I would have already died under this sword. The middle-aged man turned to leave, but his body suddenly shook and countless wounds opened up all over his body. Blood gushed out like fountains, dyeing his robes red. A powerful aura rose up like the sun. Fog scattered in all directions, vanishing in the blink of an eye. The coachman revealed a look of admiration. He cupped his hands together and said, "I won today because I have a sword in my hand. Mr. Zhou, rest in peace." Rumble, rumble. The ground trembled like waves crashing against the shore. The imperial guards of the imperial palace were rapidly rushing over. As the middle-aged man walked away, his robes were bathed in blood. Even if he turned to leave, he likely wouldn't be able to. The two fourth-clawed brothers, the evil flood dragons that they had transformed into, had already died. Their corpses were torn apart, and all that was left was a mess. The air was filled with the pungent smell of blood. Wang Dadu and the other border guards were shaken away. They vomited blood, but didn't die. They struggled to crawl up and stared at the scene in front of them. They probably didn't think that the middle-aged man who had appeared so insufferably arrogant and ridiculously strong had actually been cut to such a state with a single sword strike. Or perhaps their hearts were filled with complex emotions. They couldn't figure out why these lowly peasants were still alive at this time. The coachman took a deep breath and coughed, a bit of blood splashing out. In using that sword strike just now, he had consumed a tremendous amount of energy. Even his swordsmanship, cultivation, had shaken a bit. If he wanted to recover, he feared he would have to go into seclusion for a long time and spend a great deal of wealth. He turned and gently knocked on the carriage. "Marquis, the assassin has died. You can go to court in peace." Within the carriage, Qin Yu stared at the carriage door. His expression was dignified, not at all relaxed. In his palm, the originally cool white jade had now become fiery hot, like a red-hot stone. There was nothing in front of him, but he seemed to see a pair of ice-cold eyes on that respectful face. The carriage was quiet. The coachman frowned. He didn't know where he had revealed a flaw, but since he had already been discovered, he might as well make his move. In the next moment, the carriage door shattered. There was no more of the surging waves from before, nor was there any transcendent momentum that seemed to cut through the heavens. The short sword, Winding River, broke through the door and cut straight towards Qin Yu's head. The blade was pitch black, as if it had been attached to the darkness of the world. So, the coachman was the final chess piece today. The reason he was able to force back the middle-aged man who was at his peak just now was because he knew that no matter how strong Mr. Zhou was, no one could kill Qin Yu today. This was because he had the Western Wasteland's loyal Marquis seal on him, and this seal had been quietly infused with the power of joss flames. Thus, the coachman had slashed out with his sword just now to sever the middle-aged man's life force. Although he had paid a great price, he had allowed Winding River to exhaust all of the Western Wasteland's national destiny, allowing it to restore its true appearance and display the true might of Winding River. If a sword fell, it could sever joss flames. The loyal Marquis seal on Qin Yu's body shattered. The power of joss flames was invisible and tangible, turning into a bubble. But now, in a normal situation, this bubble could block even a half-step sovereign for a moment. But in front of Winding River, it was as fragile as a bubble. The sword shattered as it fell. The sword edge didn't stop at all, continuing to fall towards Qin Yu's head. With the sharpness of this sword, even a ruler would be instantly killed. Their body and soul would be extinguished without the least bit of life left. Ding! There was a light sound, as if a sharp blade had touched iron. The sword-wielding coachman's eyes widened in shock and horror. The shaking strength was like raging waves, flowing up his arm and crashing into his chest. For a time, the sounds of bones breaking rang out without end. The sword-wielding coachman's hand had already turned into white bones. His flesh and blood ruptured and shattered, turning into a fog of blood. He tumbled backwards and took out a talisman. Then he tore it apart and vanished. As for that short sword Winding River, it had broken into countless pieces that fell in front of Qin Yu. However, the broken sword wasn't sharp at all. Rather, it became soft, like a puddle of water that wrapped around the broken pieces and gradually fused back together. The sounds of killing shook the heavens. They came from the distance, accompanied by cries of alarm and the sound of heavy objects crashing to the ground. Qin Yu frowned. He stood atop the broken carriage. The two fine horses that had been pulling the carriage had already been turned into two piles of meat paste when the middle-aged man and the coachman clashed. Imperial palace guards surrounded the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man who had just left was forced back once more. The wounds on his body gushed out like fountains and blood gushed out. After his robes were soaked in blood, they fell to the ground. Wherever he went, he would leave behind a series of bloody footprints. But the middle-aged man still didn't fall. Even though he had become a tattered leather bag that was leaking water everywhere, he still raised his hand and sent the imperial palace guards flying away. It was unknown whether he was dead or alive. Suddenly, the middle-aged man sighed. He looked up at Qin Yu. His eyes were tired and gloomy, but there was no fear or unwillingness in them. There was only a bit of calm helplessness. "Marquis Zhongwu, I am about to die, but I promised someone that I would go back and see her. Can you let me leave in exchange for this piece of jade?" He held up a piece of black jade. It was nearly soaked in blood, but it wasn't stained in the least. Qin Yu glanced at the man and nodded. "All right." The imperial palace guard hesitated. Qin Yu lightly said, "I will bear the consequences of this matter." The imperial guard withdrew. The middle-aged man glanced at Qin Yu, smiled, and left. As Qin Yu watched the bloodied man leave, a complex look appeared in his eyes. This person was the strongest cultivator that Qin Yu had seen with his own eyes, the one that was destined to die. Even if he hadn't entered the Emperor realm, there was likely a limit to how far he could go. Such a character was actually willing to be ordered around and die in the darkness of the night. Qin Yu took a deep breath and calmed his mind. He jumped off the carriage and walked forward, his feet treading on the blood. Chapter 1574. The loyal Marshal Marquis Ning Qin stepped into the imperial palace, drenched in blood and surrounded by armored guards. At this time, everyone was watching. In the depths of a wide alley, there was a brothel filled with red lights. But today it was pitch black and quiet, similar to a haunted house. It was unknown where the girls and guests who came here to seek pleasure had gone. The middle-aged man, who was still bleeding and had an extremely pale face, left a trail of bloody footprints on the clean wooden floor of the brothel. His expression was calm. Even the unwillingness and helplessness in his eyes had faded away, leaving behind only a calm expression. The middle-aged man didn't seem surprised at all. He only silently walked forwards, clearly having found the person he was looking for. Passing through a long corridor, he reached out a hand and pushed the door open. Faint traces of light flowed out from within. The woman sitting at the round table was the owner of this brothel. But now there was no longer any charm left behind. All that was left was a calm and composed expression. At this time she stood up and bowed. Her appearance and demeanor were like that of a noble lady, inviolable and inviolable. "Hui Chui Hall, thank you, Mr. Zhou." The middle-aged man had an indifferent expression. "I didn't care that I failed to kill you and ended up becoming a chess piece in your hands. But, according to our previous agreement, as long as I make a move, regardless of success or failure, the item must be given to me as long as I am alive." The woman revealed a look of guilt. Her expression became even more sincere and respectful. "Mr. is truly righteous. The reason I waited here was to fulfill my promise and personally deliver it to Mr." With a flip of her hand, a wooden box appeared. It was squarish, and there was not a single trace of carving on it. Not even the opening could be found. The middle-aged man had already sensed the aura hidden within the wooden box. He nodded and said thank you. The woman didn't dare to accept his thanks. She moved to the side and offered the wooden box with both hands. The middle-aged man took it and turned to leave. The bloody footprints changed direction, fading into the darkness as they went further and further away. The woman with extraordinary looks and temperament widened her eyes, revealing shock and astonishment. In the next moment, a line of blood quietly appeared on her fair neck. Then her head fell to the ground. She had taken the risk of staying in the brothel and waiting for the middle-aged man to arrive. She was indeed representing Hui Chui Hall to complete the transaction with Mr. Zhou. But, as the middle-aged man had said, everything was built on the foundation that he was still alive. In other words, after the middle-aged man died, the items in the wooden box could remain in Hui Tsue restaurant. Of course, the woman didn't want to take it for herself. She didn't dare and couldn't do it, but as long as she kept the wooden box and obtained Mr. Zhou's head, it would be a great contribution. However, the woman did not expect that the deadly poison she had smeared on the surface of the wooden box was completely ineffective against the middle-aged man. Most importantly, he was already injured to such an extent that he could die at any moment. Yet, he still possessed the ability to kill with a single glance. However, the report clearly stated that the middle-aged man had lost his divine powers when facing the Darch Palace's imperial guards. Did the middle-aged man hide something, or did someone in the building want her to die on purpose? There were two possibilities, but there was no way for the woman to investigate the truth of this matter. The middle-aged man stepped out of Hui Chui restaurant and landed on the ground. His eyes became even more dim, like the last fallen leaf on a branch in late autumn, struggling and unwilling to part, rolling and struggling in the rustling autumn wind. One step up, one step down. He staggered and reached out a hand to support himself. The middle-aged man's breathing finally became chaotic. He took several deep breaths, and a bitter smile appeared on his face. "Little Zhou, is that you?" The woman's weak voice sounded out, filled with anxiety. The middle-aged man took a deep breath. He lifted a finger and pointed between his eyebrows. A cool breeze surrounded his body. It was unknown what supernatural ability he used, but his horrifying injuries instantly healed without a trace. Even that wide-sleeved robe that had been soaked in blood was now as clean as new. With a ruddy complexion and bright eyes, the middle-aged man stepped out. He smiled and responded, "It's me." He walked to the sickbed and sat down. He held the woman in his arms. "Don't worry. I said that I would come back alive to see you. I won't disappoint you." The emaciated, sickly woman nodded with a smile. The middle-aged man took out a wooden box and placed it on the woman's chest. "I've finally found the thing that can save you. You only need to sleep. When you wake up, all your pain and suffering will pass." He lowered his head and gently kissed the woman in his arms. Guilt filled his eyes. "But I'm afraid I can't continue to accompany you. The commotion this time was too great, and I didn't succeed. I must temporarily leave the imperial capital to avoid the investigation from the Western Desolate." The sickly woman's eyes widened. Her lips moved as if she wanted to say something, but the wooden box on her body had already begun to emit light. Faint traces of mist fused into her body through her orifices, restoring her withered body. At the same time, she felt an irresistible weariness. The middle-aged man's appearance became blurry, but his smile was still as warm and gentle as before. "Sleep. I will definitely come back to find you." The woman fell asleep. The middle-aged man looked down for several breaths of time and then began to cough. He covered his mouth and carefully put the woman down. His footsteps were a bit hurried. He turned around and walked behind the screen, stepping into the darkness. The moment that the middle-aged man's figure submerged into the darkness, there was a loud puff, like a spring breaking through the shackles above. At the imperial court meeting, the Western Desolate Great Emperor was enraged. Because of the assassination of Marquis Zhongwu, he severely reprimanded the imperial capital's garrison. Several great generals of the military fell to their knees and begged for forgiveness. As for the nobles of the imperial court who hadn't been involved in this matter, they coldly watched from the sidelines. The military was powerful and suppressed all sides. They were happy to watch these great generals lose face without suffering any losses. But at the same time, everyone subconsciously looked towards Marquis Zhongwu. Because of the several great generals stepping out, there were fewer people present. Not too far away from the imperial palace, although the details of the assassination hadn't been revealed yet, they already knew the approximate details. The degree of terror and horror was so great that even those watching from the perspective of a bystander felt terrified. Cold sweat dripped down their backs. But Marquis Zhongwu Ningqin was still alive and well. Besides his pale complexion, there was no sign of any injuries. It was simply terrifying. Finally, at the imperial court meeting, His Majesty brazenly issued a decree to remove Yi Yuantai, who had just become one of the leading generals of the imperial capital's garrison. And he was born in the Yi family. He was one of the most important chess pieces in the imperial capital's layout. Sharp edges were revealed. Killing intent was revealed. The complexions of all the important officials in the imperial court changed. Although they knew that the emperor races had thoughts of punishing the Yi family, such cruel and ruthless actions were likely to trigger irreparable consequences. To the Western Desolate, This was the worst possible result. Yibohu respectfully begged for forgiveness. He expressed that his lack of discipline had caused Yi Yuantai to fail in his duty and that he was willing to accept His Majesty's punishment. The great emperor sat high above. He glanced at the begging Yibohu. Just as the officials were worried that His Majesty would take advantage of this victory and beat up the Yi family, the great emperor suddenly laughed and scolded him. He said that the Yi family was a great family, so he couldn't have Yibohu take responsibility for every little thing that happened. He told him to stand up and return to the ranks. As for the assassination matter, it was easily forgotten. Following that, the imperial court meeting peacefully came to an end. As the great emperor stood up and left, Yibohu suddenly walked forwards. The complexions of the officials changed, and they moved to the sides of their own accord. That person from the Yi family wasn't present, so he was the one with the highest status and strongest strength in today's court. Even though he was disliked by His Majesty, and the Yi family was in a precarious situation, as long as the dust didn't settle, no one dared to underestimate him. Qin Yu looked up at Yibohu. Yibohu's expression was calm, but Qin Yu could feel endless killing intent from this calmness. It was biting cold and cruel, like a tiger that had come down the mountain, its eyes locked onto its prey. Marquis Loyal Marshal, there seems to be some misunderstanding between you and me. Qin Yu cupped his hands together. General Yi is too serious. I have always admired the Yi family. Even if there were some small problems, they have already been resolved. Yibohu's lips curved up in a smile. Resolved? That's a good word. I like it. He stepped forwards and patted Qin Yu's shoulder. We are both from the military. If there is a chance in the future, we should get closer. Qin Yu smiled. Definitely. Yibohu turned and walked away. His steps were like that of a dragon and like a tiger, his momentum extraordinary. Within the imperial capital, it had been many years since such a vile thing had occurred. An important minister of the court had been assassinated on the streets during the court session. The implications were far-reaching and had to be investigated to the end. Otherwise, what face would the dignified Western Wasteland Empire have left? One of the leading generals of the Imperial Guard, Yi Yuantai, had been deposed on the spot. The stern general of the Imperial Guard gnashed his teeth and locked down the entire city. Hui Chui Pavilion, which had already hidden itself in the shadows, was brutally dragged into the sunlight. Pursuit, counterattack, escape, a series of events erupted, causing the current imperial capital to be much more chaotic and tense than it had been in the past. On such a day, a middle-aged man holding a letter walked through the closed city gates. He turned and waved his hand at the city guard. The guard immediately revealed a brilliant smile, his eyes full of eagerness. The middle-aged man faintly smiled. He feared that this Lord General's joy would all come to naught. His current status and appearance were all borrowed. Even if it could be said from a certain point of view that it couldn't be any more real, the promises he made had no possibility of being fulfilled. It was wrong to lie, but there was nothing he could do. He couldn't just swagger into the Western Wasteland imperial capital to die, right? TSK, TSK. The middle-aged man grinned, revealing a smile that was completely different from before. His figure merged into the crowd and disappeared. At the city gates, the city guard wiped away his saliva. His face was red as if he had drunk several liters of wine. His feet felt light and weak. The trusted subordinate glanced at his superior and said with a bitter smile, "General, the old men of the military are really angry. Even Lord Yi Yuantai has been removed from his position on the spot. You let people into the imperial capital without permission. If this matter is discovered, it will be very difficult to resolve." The guard glanced at him and coldly smiled. "You bunch of bastards, are you afraid of being implicated by me? Humph, a bunch of ungrateful wretches. If it wasn't for me, would you be where you are today?" The group of soldiers obviously knew that their superior was a coward. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been stuck in the position of a city guard for so many years, unable to be promoted no matter what. Today, he dared to risk universal condemnation and let that middle-aged man with an air of nobility in. He definitely had absolute confidence. The problem should be that the middle-aged man had taken out the token that only the general had seen. But the key was that although they could guess it, they still felt uneasy. After all, his neck was already tied to his belt. Who knew when it would fall off? Looking at his trusted subordinate, who had seen it with a smile, the guard's mouth twitched. He couldn't suppress the joy in his heart and revealed a secret. What do you know? That is the nobility of Wudong County. He can even enter and leave the imperial palace freely, let alone our small city gate. Would I dare to stop him? I'm the one who is really tired of living. The nobility of Wudong County could enter and leave the imperial palace freely. Thinking of a taboo topic that had been mentioned before, the group of subordinates' faces changed. Then they looked at their superior and their eyes became fervent. Damn it, you bastard, if you don't get promoted, how can we get promoted and get rich? The city gate guard smiled in satisfaction. Shut up, all of you shut up. If you know that this is a crime that will cost your head, then don't speak nonsense. The group of subordinates said, yes, yes, yes. The general must have worked hard, and come drink some water. Someone suggested that after today's shift, they should treat the general to a drink. Some people even mentioned their own little sister, niece, and their cousin's wife. The city gate guard smiled and nodded again and again. Zhongwu Marquis Mansion. They had arrived. This was the place. The middle-aged man lightly coughed. He revealed a dignified and noble aura. It couldn't be any more real. He was about to step forward and knock on the door. However, right at this moment, his body suddenly stiffened, and his eyes widened in astonishment. It was like spring water that had suddenly turned into ice under extreme cold and was directly sealed within. Hiss! The middle-aged man sucked in a breath of cold air and turned to leave. But before he could take a single step, he froze in place. His forehead was covered with a cold sweat. He scowled miserably and turned around. There wasn't the slightest bit of his previous aura. I'm not leaving. If you want me to stay here, I definitely won't dare to move. Soon, the courtyard doors opened and the gatekeeper respectfully stepped to the side. Little Meaty stepped out. She looked down at the middle-aged man and sneered. Your courage isn't small at all. Aren't you afraid of death? The middle-aged man nearly collapsed to the ground. It wasn't that he was crying, but that he was really crying. Tears streamed down his face. I was wrong. Please show mercy. Little Meaty turned and walked away. Roll in here. Her face was filled with anger. If it weren't for little Chinyu, she wouldn't have bothered with him. She would have stretched out a finger and crushed him to death. The middle-aged man hurriedly ran, wiping away his tears as he chased after her. However, he didn't run. Rather, he curled up like a giant meatball. He rolled around in a smooth and natural manner, as if he had practiced this before. The gatekeeper sighed in amazement. Then he felt admiration in his heart. He thought that this was the highest realm of being a lackey of his generation. As the middle-aged man rolled around, he suddenly became spirited. He turned around and gave the gatekeeper a look that said, You brat, you know what's good for you. If it weren't for this superb lackey divine art, how could he have lived peacefully to this day? Chapter 1575. After the court adjourned, Chinyu sat in the carriage gifted to him by the Emperor Palace. He couldn't help but look at the tightly shut carriage door. He thought that there wouldn't be another sword chopping down like that, right? That sword seemed to stain the darkness of the night. Although it didn't seem surprising, it was actually terrifying. Its true killing power was likely even greater than the sword that had forced back the middle-aged man and severed his life force. Powerful. But this sword hadn't injured Chinyu at all. He looked down at the cool white jade in his hand and sighed with emotion. Treasure, what a treasure! No wonder when Meimu had given it to him, she had reminded him to return it to her when he returned. He didn't want to. Really, if it were anyone else who had experienced that sword and held this white jade, they would have the same mentality. But thinking about it, Qin Yu felt that it was impossible for him to keep this white jade. Moreover, even if Meimu really gave it to him, he might not dare to take it. Qin Yu rubbed his chin and bitterly smiled. He suppressed these thoughts for now. Then he looked at the object in his other hand. It was a ball that was transparent like water but had a gelatinous texture. It was soft and pinchable in the hand, but Qin Yu didn't believe that it was something that could be casually rubbed around. This was because this transparent water was formed from the fragments of Marquis Loyal Marshal's seal after Winding River broke apart. This object had no aura, and Qin Yu didn't know what use it had, but his intuition told him that he should hold it in his hand. Perhaps it would have some wonderful use, so he did so. Luckily, the Emperor Palace hadn't asked about Winding River's whereabouts. Perhaps in their opinion, after the sword shattered, it dissipated. In truth, this was indeed the case, but at that time, a piece of Marquis Loyal Marshal's seal had shattered. As for Qin Yu, he was surrounded by joss flames that had been cut apart. It just so happened that he had just barely managed to form his own divine kingdom. Invisibly, their auras wove together, resulting in this transparent water in front of him. Perhaps this was what it meant to say that the heavenly Tao was mysterious and unfathomable. The journey was smooth, and they safely arrived at the mansion. It wasn't that the Yi family had put down their obsession with killing, but that Yi Bohu and the great emperor had quietly reached an agreement. For example, in the imperial capital, one could only kill someone once. Since it was unsuccessful, one could only find another way. Otherwise, did they really think that the imperial palace wouldn't dare to completely shed all pretense of cordiality and go all out to annihilate the Empress Yi family? As he stepped off the carriage, the driver respectfully bowed. Qin Yu coughed, but his complexion was still a bit uncomfortable. This made the coachman in the imperial palace very nervous. He didn't know why the Marquis didn't like him. The gatekeeper said that there was a guest in the mansion. He looked a little strange, but the main point was that Madame had personally come out to invite him in. When he said, "Please," the gatekeeper's expression was even weirder than when he said "weird." Qin Yu frowned. He didn't have time to bother with the gatekeeper's thoughts. When Yun Qing and Little Butterfly came, they had only sent a maid over. But now they actually personally came to welcome them. With her personality and status, there was definitely something strange about this matter. Who could it be? Qin Yu stepped into the Marquis mansion and went straight to the rear residence. Soon he saw the uninvited guest. He wasn't an acquaintance. Qin Yu was sure he hadn't seen him before. However, as he looked at him, he could faintly feel that there was something wrong with this person's aura. Moreover, he finally understood why the gatekeeper had said that there was something strange about this guest. Little Meaty was sitting down and drinking tea. He was squatting on the ground and holding his head, cowering like a thief that had been caught red-handed by his master. "What's going on?" Qin Yu coughed and sat down next to Little Meaty. Little Meaty coldly sneered, "He's looking for you. Day after day, all this nonsense. My good vacation time is about to be wasted away." Just thinking about it made him feel stifled. His complexion became increasingly ugly. Squatting in a corner, the middle-aged man holding his head glanced over. When he saw Wang Xuanfeng's complexion, he was frightened and his complexion paled. He thought to himself, "I'm done for, I'm done for. I, Wang Xianfeng, have experienced many trials and tribulations. I've lived for so many years, and I've seen all sorts of situations. Am I going to die here today?" It wasn't that he was as timid as a mouse, but that the feeling Little Meaty gave him was terrifying to an unimaginable degree. Let alone doing anything, he feared he would die with just a single glance. Thus, to Wang Xianfeng, this gloomy complexion was the same as rolling thunder. He didn't know when he would be smashed to pieces by a bolt of lightning. Qin Yu looked over. He thought for a moment and asked, "Who are you? Why have you come looking for me?" Wang Xianfeng trembled. He said in a low voice, "I come from the far west. I came here for Grandmaster Prajna. I once mentioned something to you." Qin Yu suddenly remembered that before he left the Goliath race, The great shaman of Mang Mountain behind Prajna had used a disciple to ask him about a certain treatment. Could it be this person in front of him? Wang Xianfeng waved his hands again and again. He gulped. It's not me, it's not me. He thought for a moment and carefully looked around. Qin Yu also knew that this matter was extremely important. He looked at Little Meaty and saw that she didn't say anything. He relaxed a little and smiled. It's fine. It's safe here. Humph. Little Meaty coldly sneered. She already owed him a life-saving graciousness before, but now she had to trouble him again. No wonder her nose wasn't her nose, and her face wasn't her face. Qin Yu lightly coughed. He pretended as if he didn't feel the glare from the side. Wang Xianfeng took out a jade box from his chest. There was a yellow talisman stuck to it. It was unknown whether it was because it had been stored for too long, but the yellow talisman was already charred and black, as if it had been burned by fire. He carefully offered the jade box with both hands. My lord, this is a tuft of hair. May I ask you to take a look? Little Meaty looked at the jade box. She suddenly sneered and stood up to leave. Qin Yu revealed an awkward expression. He looked at Wang Xianfeng and said, Wait here. Don't casually walk around. He took the jade box and quickly caught up. As Little Meaty walked away, Qin Yu didn't stop. He had an awkward expression on his face. He bitterly smiled, not knowing what to say. Along the way, the maids and servants that they encountered all retreated to the sides. As they saw the madam angrily running away and the marquis carefully following behind her, they couldn't help but click their tongues. In the imperial capital today, the assassination attempt that involved the marquis had caused such an uproar that everyone knew about it. Although they didn't know the significance of this assassination attempt, they could already feel the awe and fear in the eyes of the surrounding mansions. This had never happened before. Even if the marquis had been made a marquis, they would at most be a little envious. It was clear that after this assassination attempt, the marquis's status in the imperial capital was much greater than it was before. But who would have thought that after this marquis returned to his mansion, he would have to follow behind the madam and suffer the wrath of others? The maids all gave up on any hope they had. After returning to her dwelling, Little Meaty's anger still hadn't subsided. She waved everyone away and poured herself a cup of tea, drinking it clean. Qin Yu deeply sighed. With the status of the great shaman of Meng Mountain, he wouldn't easily open his mouth. Since he did, it must be a very important matter. So, I really hope that I can help him this time. After all, with my current status, I cannot fake it. He looked at Little Meaty. Not waiting for a response, his complexion darkened, and he said with a bleak tone, Of course, if you don't want to, then, no matter how slowly he spoke, there would always be a time when he finished speaking, and then he came to an abrupt stop. Little Meaty coldly sneered. Speak. Why aren't you speaking? I haven't heard enough yet. Qin Yu turned and sat down. I know that I am in the wrong in this matter. What do you want in order for you to agree to help me? Little Meaty was so angry that she laughed. Little Qin Yu, you are becoming increasingly disrespectful towards me. Do you really think I can't do anything to you? Qin Yu said, I don't dare. I am speaking from the bottom of my heart. As long as you ask, I will do anything I can to satisfy you. After all, our relationship is quite close, right? Who is who? Little Meaty glanced at him. She seemed to regain her composure. She reached out a hand. Give it to me. Qin Yu coughed. What? What are you pretending to be stupid for? Return that white jade I gave you today. It's like this. I think that the Yi family definitely won't give up. They might try to play some more tricks. Little Meaty looked at him, a cold sneer on her lips. She had an expression that said if she believed even half a word from him, she would lose. Qin Yu forced a smile. No room for discussion? Give it to me. Then he would return it to its rightful owner. A person had to know when to advance and when to retreat. Little Meaty's attitude was so firm. If he continued to pester her, then he would be doing something stupid. Qin Yu took it out and offered it with both hands. not forgetting to express his thanks. Little Meaty turned her hand and received the white jade. Her complexion was ugly. You also know how much you owe. Let me tell you, in this world, there is no one who can owe me a debt and not pay it back. Chinyu frowned. You really can't help? The white jade was only joking around. This was the proper business. Little Meaty glanced at the wooden box in his hands. She calmly waved her hand to drive him away. Go, go, go. You're actually finding things for me to do every day. But I have a condition. If you don't agree to it, then even if you break the heavens, I won't help you. After a while, Chinyu frowned and left. As he walked out of the courtyard, he looked back and bitterly smiled. He really couldn't understand why Little Meaty wanted to do this. This request was too bizarre. Shaking his head, Chinyu turned and left. Wang Xianfeng was indeed obedient. She stayed in the living room, her hands wrapped around her head as she squatted in a corner. Qin, you waved his hand. Stand up and talk. Wang Xuanfeng's face lit up with joy, but just as he moved, he seemed to think of something. He squatted back down and whispered, I think it's best if I stay like this. From the looks of it, he was scared to death. It was unknown just what sort of suffering Little Meaty had given him just now. Qinyu was disinclined to speak further. If Wang Xianfeng wanted to squat down, then squat down. He straightforwardly said, I can help you in this matter, but I have a condition. As Wang Xianfeng left the loyal Marshal Marquis mansion, his complexion was deathly pale and his field of vision darkened. He could already see the tragic scene of his head being crushed after he passed on the message. It was truly miserable. Heavens! Why does something like this always fall on my head? What did I do wrong? Is it too late to change now? Wang Xianfeng scowled miserably. With a face that seemed as if he couldn't be provoked, he hurriedly left the imperial capital and raced towards the capital region's transmission array. Even though he knew that his fate would be miserable after he heard Qinyu's reply, he didn't dare to delay at all. Longhorn Alley was one of the tens of millions of ordinary alleys in the imperial capital. As for why it had such a name, that was an unsolved mystery. In any case, the men who lived here didn't feel that they had grown up just because of the name. But there was one thing that was consistent with the name, and that was that Longhorn Alley was indeed quite long. It was a straight line that divided two city squares. Several years ago, a strange family had moved into this alley. Ever since they moved in, they had closed their doors and lived their own lives. Besides the day they moved in, some people had seen that the owner of the house was a sickly and listless woman. The specific impression was vague, but as long as they saw her, they would say that she was a beauty. Her man had a dignified appearance and an extraordinary temperament, like a scholar. This also caused the eyes of the wine shop owner in the alley to brighten. But unfortunately, from then on, no one had seen them again. Whether it was a beauty or a man, many people felt that it was a pity. Except for the initial period when the neighbors would talk about it, as time passed, no one cared much about it. After all, life still had to go on. What was done was done. Moreover, there were many strange things in the world of cultivators. As long as things were peaceful and didn't involve themselves, there was no need to meddle in other people's business. Of course, the reason why the residents of Longhorn Alley were so at ease was because they were proper residents of the imperial city. No one would be stupid enough to cause trouble here. The wine shop owner could barely be considered a cultivator. Her realm wasn't high, but she had a way to maintain her youthful appearance. She still looked like a charming woman. She lazily leaned back in her chair. She had long since become accustomed to the hungry gazes around her. It wasn't easy for a woman to earn money. Besides, if she let others look at her, she would lose a few pounds of flesh on her chest. There was a soft creak. It wasn't very loud. In addition, the customers next to her were bragging about yesterday's assassination. It was even more exciting than experiencing it herself. The wine shop owner didn't hear it clearly, but she felt that the sound of the door opening was a little unfamiliar. She was an old resident of Longhorn Alley. She stayed here all day, so she was more sensitive to any changes in the surrounding environment. She turned around. Then she saw that the courtyard door that no one had entered or left for so many years had actually opened. A woman wearing a veil walked out. Even though her face was covered, she still exuded a sense of beauty. In this world, there was actually such a beauty. The lady boss suddenly felt a deep sense of jealousy. In particular, the few scorching gazes that fell on her had quietly shifted to another place. Gulp! Someone gulped. The woman who walked out raised a hand in front of her, as if she hadn't seen the 9 suns above her head in a long time. At this time, the lady boss's eyes brightened. She had already noticed several unfamiliar faces in the alley. She had seen many things over the years, but she hadn't revealed it before. Could it be that their target was her? But soon, the lady boss revealed a disappointed expression. Although the woman was stopped by several people, the two sides only exchanged a few words. The lady boss lifted a hand and pointed to the courtyard, and those people cupped their hands and drew back. From the looks of it, there seemed to be some respect in his words. The woman turned and walked away. After several steps, she suddenly turned around and looked at the lady boss. She smiled, and it gave people the feeling that 100 flowers bloomed in an instant. Her beauty was indescribable, but for some unknown reason, the lady boss felt as if a bucket of cold water had been poured over her head. She shivered and lowered her head. Her face was as white as snow, as if she were suffering from a serious illness. Chapter 1576. The great river came from the sky and traveled between the colorful clouds. A wudong tree could go up to the sky. This sentence referred to a place in the southwest of West Wilderness that was blessed by the heavens and was rich in spiritual energy. It was called Wudong County. Although it was deep within the Empire's territory, West Wilderness had no room to interfere with its internal affairs. This was because in the early days of the Empire's establishment, Wudong County was enfeoffed and became a fiefdom of a big family. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was a country within a country. In the beginning, Wudong County's aristocrats, sects, and even ordinary residents felt extremely uneasy. It was such a simple logic. As the saying went, how could one allow others to sleep soundly beside one's bed? Not to mention, this was not something that could be described with the words beside one's bed. It was like entering the main house and directly barging into the main family's dining table. They stretched out their hand and said that this place belonged to them, but they could not touch the dishes inside. How arrogant, how unreasonable. How could it be good when facing the dignified West Wilderness Empire? Even though the empire had just been established and everything was based on stability, once the overall situation was stabilized, they would definitely turn around and settle accounts. All of this had been proven through countless years of history. Some people tried to move their entire family. Even a rather famous sect decided to abandon the place chosen by their founder and go to Kang County, which was thousands of miles away, to find a way to survive. Wudong County's lord was indifferent to all of this and allowed them to do these little things under their eyes. However, as time passed, the facts later proved that everything was fine in Wudong County. The empire did not have the intention to turn against them. Most importantly, for some unknown reason, the Wudong tree in Wudong County's capital suddenly seemed to have been enlightened and became an immortal spiritual tree that could attract clouds and mist. Moreover, its rank was extremely high. Every day, it could attract the vast spiritual sea above the 9 heavens and condense it into a majestic river that surged into the county. Therefore, an ordinary county city became the best cultivation, holy land in the world in the blink of an eye. It was not inferior to some blessed lands and grotto heavens. Along with it, the entire Wudong County's spiritual energy became abundant, causing the surrounding counties to be envious. Those who left wanted to come back, but this time the Lord of Wudong County was not so easy to talk to. He rejected all of them without exception. There was a certain sect, relying on their own strength, was not weak. Their foundation was still deep, tried to do some tricks, in the end in the county city that occupied half of the city. A sword light shot up to the sky. One day later, the news spread that Sex Founder's ancestral hall was slashed into two. One of the most powerful Supreme Elders, many years of bitter cultivation went down the drain, was beaten into a cripple. At that time, the power of the sex was not as weak as it was now. There was a great disturbance, but the capital remained silent. This silence had already expressed their attitude. Wudong County did not care about it, and the specific details could not be investigated. In the end, the matter was left unsettled. Since then, Wudong County had been peaceful, and no one dared to provoke it. The big mansion in the county city was even more so under the Wudong tree, half hidden in the colorful clouds, and became the world's first-class immortal place. Everyone revered it and did not dare to offend it. This was the Li family of Huangzhou. The reason why the two words Huangzhou were added in front of the Li family was because, as everyone knew, in the main branch of the Huangzhou imperial family who inherited the throne, everyone's name had to be crowned with the word Li. Even the current emperor, who sat high above the 9 heavens and wielded great power in the empire, was no exception. Such a Li family, so what if it was a big mansion in half the city? No one had ever felt that it had crossed the line. And today, under the long river of spiritual power, the Li family mansion that was half hidden in the colorful clouds had two true, distinguished guests. All of the direct descendants of the family, no matter if it was the elder who was of virtue and prestige in seclusion, or the toddler who had just turned 3 years old, were all summoned into the ancestral hall and respectfully kowtowed to the 2 young men, 1 man and 1 woman, who were sitting on the main seat. Saying they were young was indeed referring to their appearance. The man was dressed in a long robe. His face was like jade. Under his sword-like eyebrows was a pair of brilliant eyes. One could tell with one look that he was not ordinary. The woman beside him was tall and slender, her legs extremely long. Just one look at her was enough to captivate one's soul. There was no coldness or arrogance in her eyes. Instead, there was a faint smile, making people feel close to her. Of course, the appearance of cultivators did not matter their age. There were many old monsters in the world who maintained a youthful appearance. However, many of the people kneeling in the ancestral hall were indeed much older than them. The man was expressionless and calmly accepted it, but the woman's face showed some helplessness. "All right, all of you get up. I haven't even left yet, but all of you are already kneeling on the ground. I feel like I'm getting old." The woman blinked and said with a smile. Everyone in the ancestral hall relaxed, and then a smile appeared on their faces. Their branch of the Li family had taken root in the western wasteland, and although it seemed like they had boundless glory, in reality, leaving the central wasteland divine prefecture was a certain degree of relegation. Facing the people from the main family, they had no confidence at all. Moreover, the 2 people before them were indeed not old, but their seniority was shockingly high. Who told their parents to think of making children after getting bored from cultivating? Of course, this also caused the 2 of them to be born with shocking talent. Although they hadn't cultivated for long, they had already surpassed countless mediocre people in this world. Well, for example, the people in the ancestral hall. Although their cultivation levels were a bit higher, if they really fought, they would be killed on the spot in just 3 to 5 exchanges. The reason was simple. They came from a good background, cultivated cultivation methods, and had powerful spells. But they also had many treasures. For example, the sword in the man's hand and the seemingly unremarkable white jade hairpin on the woman's head. Just by looking at them a few times, they felt a stabbing pain in their hearts. Tears streamed down their faces, and they could only take this opportunity to appear even more emotional, using old tears as a cover. Thank you, little ancestors. Under the leadership of the ancestors, everyone expressed their thanks in unison. Only then did they respectfully stand up. The sword-wielding man lightly said, "All right, since you've already seen them, those unrelated can leave first. This mess is giving me a headache." His words were blunt, but the Wutong Commandery Li family didn't dare to be dissatisfied. They repeatedly nodded and led the juniors out of the ancestral hall. In the end, the only ones left were the current Li family head and the 3 ancestors who were in seclusion all year round. As for their cultivation levels, even the weakest one had been a peak sovereign for many years. Li Qinghao respectfully bowed. Little ancestors, after receiving the Central Desolate Main family's orders, we have already mobilized our forces to secretly investigate the Western Desolate. Before the 2 little ancestors arrived, there were indeed several discoveries, but after careful investigation, none of them matched. The sword-wielding man coldly smiled. "You've said so much, but haven't you found anything? If you have these thoughts, you might as well use them to cultivate. That way, you won't be stuck here at such an old age." Li Qinghao was startled. He felt as if his entire body was being seen through. He couldn't help but sweat profusely. The 3 secluded patriarchs of the Li clan looked at Li Qinghao with displeasure and warning. The Central Desolate Divine Prefecture's main family had come. This was their grand Dao lucky chance, and there couldn't be any accidents. The Li family head, who seemed to be in control on the surface, began to sweat even more. His face paled, but his expression was still calm. The woman wearing a white jade hairpin suddenly smiled. "All right, Li Ge, don't bully others. Retract your sword intent." Humph! Li Ge closed his eyes. The invisible sword intent that enveloped Li Qinghao disappeared. He wiped the cold sweat from his forehead and bowed respectfully to the woman. "Thank you, little ancestor Ruhua." Li Ji's mouth twitched. He opened his eyes a little and looked at Li Qinghao, thinking that he had some guts. Li Ruhua smiled brightly. She looked at him and then at the grateful Li Qinghao. "My name was given by my parents. I can't do anything about it, but if I don't like it, I don't like it. Just call me Second Miss from now on." Li Qinghao had already sensed something was wrong. He sweated profusely as he wiped the sweat off his forehead. He nodded repeatedly, but he didn't understand. Ruhua was such a beautiful name, but little ancestor's actions were indeed puzzling. Li Ge suddenly opened his eyes. He coughed lightly. "Let's talk business." Li Ruhua nodded with a smile. The new barbarian emperor was born. I don't know what method he used, but he actually cut off the 13th tower's tracking and hid himself from the world. Since that's the case, it won't be easy to find him. It's normal that Patriarch Qinghao didn't find anything. On the other hand, we have to be careful if we find him. There's a high chance that it's a trap set by the barbarians. Li Qinghao nodded repeatedly. He felt that this little ancestor Ruhua was really considerate. She was a rare kind person in the main family, but he didn't know that he had almost played with fire just now. Although the 13th tower's tracking was concealed, it gave us a rough location. Li Ge waved his sleeves. Threads of sword energy surged out and interweaved into an exquisite map in the air. It was as small as mountains, rivers, and cities. He drew a circle that included a large area to the west of Western Wilderness. "So, I came here with Second Mississippi," Second Miss Li nodded. "But we can't be sure if it's a deliberate act by the person who concealed the heavenly secrets. So, there are also people rushing over from the north, east, and south. Of course, they aren't people of our Li family." An old ancestor of Wudong County's Li family slightly frowned. He respectfully said, "Two little ancestors, is this also a test?" Li Ji's face was cold. "Of course. Whoever finds the new barbarian emperor first will get a chance to enter the 13th tower." Deep in his eyes there was a burning heat. "So, if you can help us find the new barbarian emperor, all your dreams will come true. I can even go back and ask the patriarch to give some of your clansmen a chance to return to the central wilderness." Li Qingtian and the three old ancestors were overjoyed. "Two little ancestors, please rest assured. The Li family will do our best." The veiled woman who left Longhorn Alley attracted many gazes. Some of them were as hot as fire, as if they wanted to skin her alive. She wasn't angry. When she was in a good mood, she would even turn around and respond with her eyes. So, the others' breathing became heavy and their eyes turned red. Ah, a pained howl suddenly sounded out from a restaurant on the side of the street. The noble young master, who was sitting by the window and admiring the beautiful woman, raised his hands to cover his eyes. Blood gushed out from his eyes, burning as it came into contact with the air. Crimson flames instantly wrapped around the noble young master. The complexions of the guards beside him changed. But the fire was too fierce, and its might was terrifying. Before they could even respond, the flames were extinguished. A set of white bones, like a smooth and flawless porcelain, fell to the ground with a clatter. "Young master!" The guards roared out, their eyes red. Of course, it wasn't because they saw the beautiful woman, but because once the noble young master died as his personal guards, they would definitely be implicated. Is it that woman just now? Catch her! Whoosh, whoosh. With the sound of breaking air, the guards rushed out of the window and landed on the ground. They fiercely looked around, but they couldn't find that woman. She was like a shadow vanishing without a trace. Meanwhile, on another stone bridge, several dozen li away from this street, under the shadow of the bridge, there really was a figure walking out. After it came into contact with light, it rapidly solidified, turning into the veiled woman who was still incomparably beautiful. Chapter 1577. Wherever there was light in the world, there would always be shadows. Even the grand western wasteland imperial capital, known as one of the most prosperous places in the world, still had many dark corners. For example, under this stone bridge, there were many homeless people who were in rags and did not have a home to return to. There were men and women, and there were many of them. The air was filled with a disgusting stench that made one frown. The appearance of the veiled woman was like a cool breeze, instantly attracting countless gazes. The women were envious and jealous. The men were stunned for a moment. Then, after a brief moment of shock, a burning desire and greed began to emerge. His throat bobbed up and down. Suddenly, there was a gulping sound. It was unknown who swallowed a mouthful of saliva, but it was more like a signal. Someone began to stand up. First, he swept his eyes over the surrounding men. Then, with a low laugh, he approached. His clothes were tattered, but they were considered good for this place. The material seemed good, and his body was tall and strong. His eyes were fierce and fiery. The veiled woman took the initiative to walk forward. The man was stunned for a moment before he grinned. "Little beauty, since you're so sensible, I can let you suffer less. Perhaps I'll even send you out later." He reached forward and grabbed her veil, wanting to see what she looked like under the veil. Smoothly, the man lifted a corner of the veil. He licked his lips and stared with wide eyes. Then he didn't know what he saw, but his tall and strong body suddenly froze. Then, like a wooden stake, he fell to the ground with a loud bang. There was no aura left, and he was completely motionless. He couldn't be more dead. The veiled woman paused for a moment. She looked at the robes on the corpse, and a complex look of sorrow appeared in her eyes. Without pausing, she stepped over the man's corpse and continued to walk deeper into the bridge. This time, no one dared to look at the woman. The natives living here all desperately lowered their heads, afraid that they would make the slightest sound. When she reached the depths of the bridge, the veiled woman stopped. The smell here was even more pungent. Apart from the stench, there was also the lingering smell of decay. 7 or 8 corpses were piled up here. Some had rotted away, and their flesh and bones were half separated. Some had died not long ago, and there were still traces of blood. The woman reached out and pulled down the top 2 corpses. Then, she stared blankly at the corpse that appeared in front of her. Numerous wounds covered every inch of his body, starting from the top of his head down to the bottom of his feet. Not a single spot was left unscathed. Blood had already flowed out of these wounds, causing the exposed flesh to appear extremely pale. The long robe that he was wearing had been stripped away by someone, so it could be seen even more clearly. However, No matter how hard the veiled woman looked at the corpse, she couldn't see the slightest bit of elegance from the past. But she knew very well that the corpse in front of her was him. He had thought that she wouldn't be sad. She had even searched for his corpse to confirm the final outcome. But she discovered that she was wrong. Right now, within her chest, her heart was violently beating, as if it wanted to jump out and slap her a few times. Ask her if she regretted it? Dong, dong. A clear heartbeat could be heard coming from the woman's chest. Her body trembled slightly. Intense heartbeats reverberated under the stone bridge. The people who lived here all had pained expressions on their faces. Their eyes were filled with panic. They struggled to escape, but all of their strength had been sucked out and they couldn't move at all. Blood overflowed from their orifices. Then, from the pores of their bodies, they turned into blood-soaked people. They maintained the terrified and despairing appearance they had when they were alive. But because they had been sucked dry, all the blood and moisture in their bodies had turned them into withered corpses. Ah! A scream came from the woman's mouth. Flames soared into the skies, wrapping around the stone bridge. The searing heat distorted space, causing the figure of the great fox that appeared to become increasingly blurry. One could only faintly see that behind this great fox there were tails wantonly waving about, their momentum shocking the heavens. East of the city, loyal Marquis Mansion. Little Ro suddenly arched an eyebrow. She glanced at a place where flames soared into the skies. 8 tails, no, he's about to advance. He hit himself quite deeply. She looked at it several times. Within her eyes, there seemed to be countless streams of light flowing at an astonishing speed. TSK, HSK, HSK. How pitiful and laughable. Are all the demons so useless now? It was clearly an opportunity to prove one's Tao, but after completing it, they almost went crazy. She raised an eyebrow and curled her lips, full of disdain. However, the taste of the 9 tails demon cores was also superb, because they had used up all of their secrets and experienced many disasters that could be said to be all-encompassing. Little Ro was a little tempted, but she quickly sighed and revealed a helpless expression. In her current state, if she fought with the 9 tails, she would definitely be exposed. At that time, if she was driven back, it would be troublesome to come out again. Endure it, endure it. It's not like I haven't eaten the 9 tails demon cores before. At most, I'll think of a way to eat a few more in the future to compensate myself. 3, at least 3. This old lady will eat one at a time. Crunch, crunch. Little Ro closed her eyes, hoping that out of sight, out of mind. First, Marquis Zhongwu was assassinated, then the assassins from Hui Chui Pavilion caused trouble. Now, in the imperial capital, the 9 tails great demon had descended. Not only did it burn a stone bridge, but it also affected the surrounding areas, turning them into ruins. The casualties were extremely heavy. This was equivalent to holding down the imperial guards and slapping them in the face. It was also a provocation to the West Wasteland Empire. If they couldn't come up with a proper result, it was foreseeable that the entire imperial garrison would have to bear the wrath of the military. But amidst the flames that soared into the skies, the figure of the great fox flickered and then disappeared. No matter how many experts the military searched, no matter how hard they searched, they couldn't find any trace of it. It was as if it had completely disappeared from the world. The imperial palace. Above the 9 layers, the emperor behind the bead curtains had a serious expression. It's the 9 tails. As the emperor, he was in the imperial capital and could sense everything. Even though the big fox only appeared for a moment before completely disappearing, he was still able to lock onto its true body. Below, including the sky-bearing king, several officials frowned at the same time. All living beings in the world could cultivate, so there were all kinds of great demons. The Fox clan was one of them. However, the 9 tails was different. It represented the peak of demon cultivation and had great abilities. Because of the restrictions of the world, the strongest demon clans were all in the central wasteland divine continent. It was difficult for them to be born at the borders. In other words, this nine-tails demon fox must have come from the central wasteland. It was unknown when such a great demon had snuck into the imperial capital. Today, the other party had suddenly revealed his true form. Just what was going on? The emperor pondered for a few breaths and suddenly said, "Sky-bearing king, is there any movement in Wudong County recently?" The Li family had enjoyed peace and wealth, but from a long time ago, they had been monitored by the imperial capital. This could be seen as a form of deterrence. The Li family knew about this, but both sides didn't say it out loud, maintaining a certain tacit understanding. The sky-bearing king bowed. "Your Majesty, an urgent message was sent yesterday. All the men of the Li family of Wudong County have gathered in the ancestral hall. Our spies are unable to approach and investigate, but according to information obtained through other channels, 2 little ancestors have arrived in the Li family. If I'm not wrong, they should be people from the Central Wastelands Li family." Behind the bead curtain, the emperor gently tapped the table. The Central Wastelands Li family had arrived in Wudong County, and then the nine-tails demon fox had appeared. Could there be a connection? He suddenly thought of some top-secret information that had been sent to him. Recently, the Central Wastelands Holy Land's 13 towers had been acting up, and the various great clans had also responded. It was just that they hadn't been able to find out what was happening. If he connected all of this together, could it be that they were interfering with each other? Investigate. Find the nine-tails demon fox. No matter where it comes from, it must pay the price for causing trouble in my Western Wasteland's imperial capital. Yes, Your Majesty. Qin Yu looked at the mass of clear water in his hand, a strange expression on his face. If his senses weren't wrong, this thing was absorbing incense. Now that he focused his mind, he could see the outline of a little person gradually appearing in the clear water. It sat cross-legged, a smile on its face. Although it was extremely blurry, he didn't know if it was an illusion or not. But when Qin Yu looked at the little person, he felt as if the little person was also looking at him. Faint traces of the power of incense poured into the little person, causing it to become increasingly clear. Qin Yu couldn't figure out what was happening. In fact, if it weren't for the fact that he had an incomplete divine kingdom, he wouldn't have been able to sense these things. His eyebrows gradually furrowed together. He looked at the joss-flame little person that appeared in the mass of clear water. Qin Yu didn't know if this was good or bad. If there was a problem he couldn't solve, he could ask Midi. But before he could stand up, a cold laugh echoed in his ears. "If there's a problem, the first thing you think of is me. Little Qin Yu, should I praise you for being smart or for not knowing the difference between life and death?" It was unknown where Midi came from, but she appeared in the room. She lifted a hand and pointed at herself. "I am a great being hidden in space-time. My strength is unfathomably deep, and my boundary is infinitely mysterious. I can descend into the infinite heavens and sign contracts with living beings to complete transactions." Qin Yu glanced at her. "So, are you trying to blow your own trumpet?" With her words cut off, Midi clenched her teeth. "Shut up!" She glared at him. Her lips moved, but she didn't say anything else. In truth, she was just a bit worried. During this period of time, she had occupied this little girl's body. When she arrived in this world, she seemed to have been contaminated with karma. But when she focused her divine sense, she couldn't sense anything at all. Although it was impossible for almighty beings to measure themselves, this was the first time she had experienced something like this. Just where did the problem lie? As this thought flashed through her mind, Midi sat down. With a wave of her hand, the mass of clear water in Qin Yu's hand flew into her hand. "Although I think you are rather impatient, little Qin Yu, your luck isn't bad. With a lucky chance, you were actually able to raise something like this." Midi squeezed a bit with her fingers. Then, the joss-flame little person in the mass of clear water seemed to be frightened and emitted a small scream. "Shut up!" The scream came to an abrupt end. The joss-flame little person clearly feared Midi. She glanced at Chinyu, her meaning clear. You aren't as obedient as this little thing. Chinyu had a calm expression. What is this thing? Midi said. The power of Joss flames is faith. The divine kingdom you established. It can barely be considered a half-finished product. It is still far from the true Joss flame great Tao, so it's normal that you don't know this. This little person is called a Joss flame boy. It is a spirit that is occasionally born in the cultivation of the Joss flame great Tao. This thing can help the master absorb the power of Joss flames between the heavens and earth. It is similar to an incarnation that cultivates and can accelerate the absorption of Joss flames. Chinyu was keenly aware that while Midi was pretending to be calm, there was a trace of abnormality in her words. Is it very precious? Midi's lips twitched. She honestly nodded. It can be considered precious. Some cultivators that step onto the Joss flame great Tao are willing to pay a price for it. Of course, not all Joss flame boys can be sold by others. Once your boundary reaches a certain level, you will naturally learn of this. She looked at Chinyu and tossed the mass of clear water in her hand. Do you want to make a deal? Hand over this little fellow, and I can consider forgiving you a portion of your previous debt. Chinyu looked at her, not speaking. Midi coughed. 30%. Chinyu still didn't speak. Midi clenched her teeth. Half, that is the most I can offer. No matter where you go, it is impossible for anyone to offer a higher price than me. Chapter 1578. Chinyu was a bit tempted. Although it was said that one didn't need to worry about having too many debts, the truth was that he didn't have much confidence in himself. Moreover, Midi had mentioned that he had to pay back his debts several times. It was more like a warning. For instance, just now the meaning was obvious. To be able to clear away half the debt in one go was certainly tempting. But the more tempting it was, the more it proved that the little person in this mass of clear water possessed an astonishing value. Thinking for a moment, Chinyu slowly said, Can you tell me the specific uses of the Joss flame boy? Midi nodded. Of course. It is still yours. She glanced at Chinyu. Before, didn't you have thoughts of intercepting a portion of the Western Desolate's Joss flame power? You weren't able to do it before, and even if you thought of a way to do it, it would have been the same as seeking death. But now, with the help of the incense boy, it's not too difficult anymore. Chinyu's eyes brightened. By intercepting the Western Desolate's Joss flame power and accelerating the formation of his divine kingdom, it would eventually increase his own strength. So the Joss flame boy could also be used to do something like harming others to benefit oneself. He looked at the mass of clear water in Midi's hands and fell into a dilemma. He hesitated for a moment. Midi didn't urge him. She could only remind him. If Chinyu was smart enough, he should know what to choose. After all, there was an old saying that was extremely true. Treasures were naturally the best, and everyone wanted them. But one had to be alive in order to have the qualifications to enjoy them. Otherwise, no matter how good a treasure was, it would only be an illusion. Chinyu looked up, his eyes brightening. I can give you the Joss flame, boy, to pay off half the debt. But don't worry. I have a proposal for this. How about you listen? Midi nodded. Chinyu stood up. He paced back and forth several times and then knocked his forehead. It's like this. You see, although the Joss flame boy tastes good, it would be far too wasteful to directly eat it. How about this? After you take it away, you can rent it to me for a period of time. As for the price, we can discuss it later. Midi looked at him, her eyes strange. She never thought that he would come up with such a refreshing idea. If he paid off the debt and then rented it back, that would be the same as running around in circles without delaying anything. Chinyu felt a bit uncomfortable being stared at by her. He coughed. I'm just thinking for you. No one will suffer a loss. You're the one who didn't lose out, right? Little Midi interrupted him. Just as Chinyu thought he would end up like that white jade and be tossed about blindly, little Midi lifted a hand and pointed at the mass of clear water. Ripples spread out on its surface, and a faint black mark appeared within the ripples, vanishing in a flash. All right, the deal is done. Now that the incense boy has stamped it, it belongs to me. She glanced at it and tossed it back. He's too weak right now. Help me raise him. Little Chinyu, I'm warning you. This thing is no longer yours. If I lose it or he dies, there will be great trouble. Chinyu received it with both hands. He smiled and nodded. Don't worry, don't worry. I will definitely help you and serve you well. There won't be any problems. After saying this, he stared at little Meaty, his smile becoming even more radiant. Humph. With a cold snort, Meaty raised her hand. Her 5 fingers lit up, and the image of a jade slip appeared, quickly solidifying, creating something out of nothing. Seeing this, Chinyu's eyes brightened. He wondered just what level of powerhouse this mysterious existence hidden in space-time was at. Emperor Realm? He didn't think so. This isn't a gift for you. In order to prevent you from making a mistake and causing the incense boy to be damaged, I gave you the instructions. This jade slip is a one-time use item and the contents cannot be divulged to others. After speaking, little Meaty turned and left. Just like when she arrived, she vanished with a single step. Chinyu glanced at the ball of clear water in his hand, and his smile became much more sincere. Sometimes, when he thought about it, he felt that his luck was truly good. But there was no such thing as a free lunch falling from the sky. Only then could there be a second. Chinyu always felt that there was a reason behind little Meaty's current attitude towards him, one that he didn't know. In fact, even little Meaty herself wasn't sure what this reason was. He placed the jade slip between his eyebrows. It began to release light, and then, little by little, it became illusory. It was like a lit candle. As it released light, it also burned itself. The jade slip vanished. Chinyu opened his eyes. He already knew how the incense boy stole his incense. But this wasn't easy. It required some precious supplementary materials, and it also required the right time and place. But this didn't matter. The incense boy hadn't fully taken form yet, and this itself required a certain amount of time. He could slowly think of a method. It was just that if he did this, he would have to make some changes to his plans. Before the incense boy took form, he would temporarily stay in the imperial capital. The reason was simple. The Western Wasteland's imperial capital was where the destiny of the nation gathered, and the imperial palace was where all the incense was gathered. If he stayed here, the incense boy would be able to condense faster. Imperial capital, civilian residence. This wasn't a noun, but a specific reference. The family's surname was Civilian. Their ancestors weren't too extravagant, but their luck had been good. Before the Western Wasteland established their capital, they had coincidentally bought half a street. The younger generation also knew how to cherish their blessings and enjoy their blessings. Although there were some ups and downs, they were able to preserve the foundation of their ancestors. Because of their surname, the signboard at the entrance wasn't large. It was gray and unremarkable. One shouldn't reveal their wealth. Since there wasn't a strong person in the family and there wasn't a backer behind them, the more low-key it was, the better. The young master of the civilian residence had just come of age several years ago. He had a dissolute temperament and liked to wander around brothels. According to the old master, he had spent quite a bit of money to wander around a few streets. He was really a prodigal son. Although the old master scolded him, he didn't stop him. According to the elders in the family, he had been like this when he was young. They were like father and son. However, these few days the young master, Min Xiangtai, was acting a little strange. He didn't leave the residence even once and went to the brothels to have fun. The old master was shocked. He quickly ordered the housekeeper to secretly invite a famous doctor and sneak into Min Xiangtai's courtyard under the cover of the night. Although he was the young master of the manor, he was actually the only son. He had 7 or 8 maidservants. If something were to happen to him, the family's descendants would be cut off. If the family's foundation was destroyed, How would they have the face to meet their ancestors in the future? The young master woke up in the middle of the night. He felt that his father had discovered his secret, and his face instantly turned pale. The old master looked at him and gave him a heavy slap. "You little bastard, I told you long ago that you can play around, but you have to take precautions. Now, you've been infected with all sorts of things. How can you pass down the legacy to this old man in the future?" After being slapped and scolded, Min Xiangtai felt relieved. He glanced at the solemn-looking old butler and the old miracle-working doctor of the medical center, whom he had once accompanied his good friend to meet. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Father, I'm not sick. I'm perfectly fine. Why aren't you sleeping in the middle of the night? What are you thinking?" The old master didn't believe that he had failed to coax him, so he had to examine him. Min Xiangtai's face turned red. He glanced at the direction of the study and received another slap. "Don't put on an act. The 2 girls in the study were already taken by you 2 years ago. Do you really think I don't know? I'll turn a blind eye to give you some face. Hurry up and take them off. Don't dawdle, otherwise I'll do it." After some time, the old miracle doctor personally observed and discussed with the old master. After confirming that there was nothing wrong, both sides let out a long sigh of relief. Before the old master could say a few words of blessing from the ancestors, he was driven out by Min Xiangtai, who had pulled up his pants. "Go, go, go. I'm going to sleep." The old master wasn't angry. Instead, he felt relieved. He laughed and thought of the new concubine in the mansion. His heart warmed up. He turned around and left. The housekeeper still had to deal with the aftermath and personally sent him away. Although there was no illness or disaster, he didn't forget to seal a thick bag of medical fees. The old miracle doctor was already experienced. He smiled and accepted it. He turned around and entered the small sedan. In the study room, the 2 maids, who were woken up by the noise, looked at the young master who rushed over. They didn't say anything, but their faces turned red. Their eyes blinked and they were moist. Min Xiangtai wasn't in the mood to fool around with them. He patiently waved his hand. "I was woken up. I can't sleep today. I want to read for a while. You can all go outside and sleep." The maids' eyes were full of resentment, but they didn't dare to say anything. They bowed and left. Min Xiangtai quickly walked to the back of the study table. When he came to the familiar spot in front of the bookshelf, he found that the book that was originally placed there was actually gone. He was so shocked that he broke out in a cold sweat. He didn't bother to wipe it at all. He looked around in panic. At this moment, a light laugh sounded. "Young master, what are you looking for?" Min Xiangtai was overjoyed when he heard this voice. He focused and looked again. The book was actually in its original place. The voice had come from the book. Min Xiangtai tidied his clothes and bowed with cupped hands. Only then did he respectfully take it down and open it on the table. A painting of a beautiful woman appeared in front of him. Now, the beauty in the painting was blinking at him. "Young master, don't hide your illness for fear of treatment. If there's a problem, it's better to treat it as soon as possible." Min Xiangtai's face turned red. He waved his hands. "No, no, I'm very healthy. It's my father who made trouble out of nothing," the beauty laughed. "Silly. I'm just teasing you, my young master." Min Xiangtai let out a long breath. He rubbed his head and smiled brightly. A few days ago, in order to deal with the teacher's inspection, he had pretended to flip through the book and accidentally found this fairy sister. Only then did he know that the saying that there was a beauty in the book was actually true. Although he had only seen her once, the fairy sister's appearance had already captivated him. He no longer had any interest in the common rouge outside. Listening to the charming laughter, Min Xiangtai took a deep breath. He cupped his hands and bowed. "Fairy, the moon is bright tonight. I wonder if you can come out for a chat?" The page of the book emitted a cloud of light. When it dissipated, a woman in a long dress appeared. She looked 60 to 70% similar to the person in the painting. However, there was a more alluring aura between her brows than the original. She turned around and looked through the window at the bright moon above her head. She squinted her beautiful eyes. Yes, the moon tonight is really round. Li Qinghao frowned. His eyes were gloomy and his mood was terrible. Although his bloodline had been exiled to this barbaric land of the Western Wasteland, they were still of the same clan. But at the very least, they were of the same clan as the Li clan of the central, desolate, divine prefecture, and their bloodline was rather close. Coupled with the scheme they had put in place back then, they had been living quite well over the years. Although they had always kept a low profile in accordance with the teachings of their ancestors, they didn't lack the respect and status they deserved. The children of the Li family rarely left Wudong Commandery, but there were a few that did. Wherever they went, people would flatter them and they would succeed in every endeavor. But just as someone from the main family came, there was a problem. A junior of the Li family, who had run away in the name of studying, had left his life lamp in the family broken. According to the words of the person from the ancestral hall, this life lamp should have been broken several days ago. But for some reason, it had only broken apart recently, triggering a warning from the ancestral hall. If this matter was known by the two little ancestors, they would likely look down on this branch of the Li family from Wudong Commandery even more. Before Li Qinghao could send the person from the ancestral hall away to suppress this matter, a voice sounded out in his ears. Where was he killed? The one asking this question was the second miss of the Li family. How could Li Qinghao dare to refuse? He bitterly smiled and told her everything that had happened. Chapter 1579. Li Ruhua remained silent. Li Gu suddenly said, Guanhai City is one of the 108 main cities of West Wilderness, right? Li Qinghao nodded. That's right. It's just as little ancestor said. Li Gu glanced at Li Ruhua, who remained silent at the side. He flicked his finger lightly. A few days ago, a 9-tailed demon fox appeared in the Western Wasteland imperial capital, and a Li family disciple died in Guanhai City. There might be a connection. Li Qinghao felt a bit dizzy. He looked at this Li clan little patriarch who cultivated the sword and thought, where did this logic come from? Of course, it was fine for him to criticize little ancestor in private, but since it was little ancestor who spoke, he didn't have the guts to question her. He cupped his fists and said that little ancestor was meticulous and extremely quick-witted. Li Gu looked over. How is it? Li Ruhua nodded. Although he's only a junior of the Wudong Commandery's Li clan, he's the bloodline of my Li clan after all. How can he die without knowing the reason? The two little ancestors insisted on avenging Li Tsangzhou, so the Wudong County's Li family naturally had no reason to refuse. After bowing, Li Qinghao quickly left to make arrangements for the following matters. However, after walking for a while, Li Qinghao's expression became calm again. He knew very well how important he was in front of the two little ancestors. Even if he was killed, they probably wouldn't raise their eyes. Revenge for Li Tsangzhou? Seemed like there was more to this than meets the eye. After returning to his residence, Li Gu flicked the scabbard with his finger. With a wung sound, countless tiny sword qi appeared out of thin air and surrounded the two of them. He turned around and said with a frown, Did you sense that a junior from the Li family of Wudong County was killed? Li Ruhua nodded. After a moment of hesitation, she shook her head. It's a vague feeling, but it's not very accurate. It's like the moon in the mirror. It seems like it could disappear and change at any moment. Li Ji's expression returned to calmness. Then you really should hurry up. No wonder you were in such a hurry. Even if you tried to cover it up, it would be too late. Li Ruhua said, although the Li clan of Wudong County still holds a grudge against them for being banished back then, they're not stupid and know what to do. For now, before we find the barbarian sovereign, we can trust them. Li Gu nodded. If you say it's believable, then there's no problem. He suddenly chuckled. A 9-tailed demon fox, has actually appeared in the imperial city of the Western Wasteland. After this trip, I might have a chance to take her as my wife. In the future, I can sleep with her every night. That would be great. Liu Hua glanced at him. Fox demons are also demons. Although the legends say that they are beautiful, as long as they are demons, they will always eat humans. On the bank of the stream, the boulder was like a millstone, its surface smooth and glossy after being washed, without the slightest trace of edges. A scholar was holding a scripture that had been flipped through to the point of being tattered, yet still held on to it. He shook his head from time to time and clicked his tongue from time to time. He was beaming with joy as if the story in the scripture was extremely interesting. All of a sudden, a deep rumble resounded, as if a clap of thunder had exploded in the depths of the earth. At the same time, it was like a giant creature that had been in hibernation for a long time. Now that it had awakened from its slumber, it could flip the world upside down. The meandering stream in front of him instantly turned into a berserk beast. Countless water pillars rushed out from the ground, turning into a river in the blink of an eye. Waves soared to the heavens, sucking in all the boulders on the bank of the stream. Some of the boulders were unstable and were sent tumbling in all directions. The boulder beneath the scholar didn't move in the slightest. After he finished reading the last page of the scripture, he rolled it up and casually placed it at his waist. He stood up and glanced at the turbid waves in front of him. The raging waves of the river rumbled through the heavens. Stop messing around. What's the use of hiding underwater? Since I've come here, sooner or later you will be struck by my sword. Why don't you come out earlier so that you won't be late? Also, I can leave this place earlier and find a place to eat. The scholar patted his belly. Look, it's flattened. The river tumbled even more fiercely, and the waves howled. The scholar clearly understood. He faintly smiled. Grievance? Grievance? Our academy doesn't care about such things. A tooth for a tooth, an eye for an eye. Oh, you say it has nothing to do with you, that you don't even know me. I know, but so what? All the great demons of the world are one family. Which ancient demon emperor said those words? Although I can't remember clearly, what you said makes sense. Since you're a family, I'll look for since you are one family, then I will find you. The river continued to tumble, but there was no thought coming out. Clearly, the great demon who had been cultivating for so long and had only been waiting for this day to ascend was left speechless, or perhaps so terrified that he couldn't even speak. The scholar shook his head, a helpless look on his face. You great monsters have decent strength, but your courage is far inferior to that of your ancestors. I've read in the books that in ancient times you nearly became the masters of this world. How glorious was that! The underwater great demon didn't move or hear anything. It had a resolute attitude as if it couldn't hear anything and would rather miss the heavens than show itself. The scholar sighed. If that's the case, then I'll have to spend a little more effort. But you better think about the consequences. There was no response. The scholar rose to his feet and shook his sleeves. He didn't move at all, but a sword light whistled past and sank into the roiling river. The river paused and fell into a moment of silence. In the next moment, the place where the sword light cut through was instantly split in two. The corpse of a giant fish appeared in front of the scholar. Its body was several thousand feet long, and its scales were exposed to the sun, shining brightly. Its aura was noble, and two long dragon whiskers grew from the corners of its mouth. There were also two protrusions on its head. From the looks of it, it had clearly reached the boundary of leaping over the dragon gate. If it could smoothly break through today, it could smoothly transform into a dragon. In the great lands of the central wasteland, after some years, another peak, great demon would appear. But now, just as it was about to transform into a dragon, it was cut apart by a sword and died at the bottom of the river. The scholar shook his head. Why bother? You only made me waste more effort. He jumped off the boulder, but didn't fall into the water. This was because after the great demon was cut down, the river vanished. Once again, it returned to the appearance of a small brook. A foot-long goldfish was floating on the surface of the brook. It was unknown where the scholar took out a charred black stick from. His movements were extremely skilled as he casually stabbed it into the water, piercing through the goldfish's mouth and tail. He lifted it up to take a look and laughed. Delicious, delicious. He started a fire and roasted the fish. The oil glistened and a delicious fragrance immediately assailed the senses. Numerous covetous gazes converged over from all directions. The heavens and the earth were deathly silent, and even the gentle breeze had stopped. A shivering fear spread out from the world itself, as if it were afraid that it would be smashed to pieces in the next moment. The scholar took off the gourd hanging at his waist. He raised his head and drank a mouthful. Then he looked around. "You want to eat? Then come over. You can't reach it from so far away." No one replied. The world became even quieter. The scholar shook his head and smiled. "If you aren't going to move, then I won't be polite." He brought the stick to his mouth and sucked in a breath, an intoxicated look on his face. The people of the world say that dragon meat is the best. They really don't lie to me. As he bit down, the juices of the meat splashed out. It was soft and delicious, and a rich fragrance flooded his mouth and nose. From all directions, the eyes of those around him revealed anger, cruelty, as well as a bit of burning greed that couldn't be concealed. The scholar ate a mouthful of meat and a mouthful of wine. His mouth was covered in grease, and he looked uncomfortable. He casually pointed to the surroundings and said, "You guys are just too hypocritical. All of you clearly want to eat each other up, yet you still shout about being a family. How boring." The air remained silent. No one moved, and no one even roared. They were all afraid that if their aura leaked out, they would be locked onto by him. As he ate and drank, the scholar seemed a bit drunk. His eyes were hazy, and he began to speak some gibberish. There were a lot of bits and pieces, and as he ate and drank, it was blurry and indistinct. Then he fell silent. Those eyes that gathered on him suddenly felt danger. They left without hesitation, vanishing in the blink of an eye. The scholar sat cross-legged and used his sleeves to wipe his mouth. But no matter how sloppy he was, his robes were still as clean as new, not tainted by the slightest bit of filth. "Little Joe, I told you long ago, a monster is a monster. You can't believe it, you can't believe it. You said you knew back then, but what do you know? Otherwise, you wouldn't have fallen to such a state." After he finished the last mouthful of roasted fish, the ground suddenly shook. A miserable and mournful cry rang out in his ears. It was filled with endless despair, anger, and fear. A Dragon Gate realm goldfish was about to leap up and become a true dragon, becoming a peak great monster in the world. But now it was dead. All traces of it in the world were swallowed up with this one bite. From this moment on, it was truly dead. It could no longer be reborn or reincarnate. Even if one reversed the river of time, one could no longer find any trace of it among the countless lives in the river. This was the consequence of spending a bit more effort, that the scholar repeatedly said. After eating and drinking to his heart's content, he fell to the ground and slept soundly. A gentle breeze started to blow across his face. The world was still silent. Even now, no one dared to make a move against the scholar that they hated to the extreme. The auspicious clouds condensed into rain. Golden raindrops fell into the lake, causing the fish in the lake to jump and cheer. From time to time, fish would leap out of the water and swallow the glittering raindrops. Many cultivators gathered outside the lake. There were young men and women with low cultivations, as well as immortal-like and unfathomable cultivators. They all came to see the heavenly rain blessing that only appeared once in 100 years. Several large fish with 2 claws crawled out of the water and faced the main peak hidden above the clouds. They knelt down and worshipped the immortal ancestor, thanking the immortal ancestor for bestowing them with a fortuitous encounter, giving their descendants a chance to gain intelligence. A drop of golden rain was an opportunity for enlightenment. No wonder the goldfish in the lake were so excited. The cultivators by the lake, no matter their cultivation level, couldn't help but feel endless respect and awe for the ancestor on the main peak when they saw the scene. Then, they felt proud from the bottom of their hearts. With a single thought, the auspicious clouds condensed into rain, enlightening all living beings. This was already a true immortal ancestor's method. In the entire divine land, there were only a few people who could do this. With the ancestor overseeing the fate and deterrence, they could cultivate in peace and not worry about disasters descending one day. Suddenly, several large fish that crawled out of the water and had 2 claws fell to the ground. Their eyes were still filled with joy and gratitude, but they were no longer breathing. Then, in the lake, countless goldfish that had jumped out of the water to catch the golden rain all turned white, covering the surface of the lake. There was dead silence. Not only was there no movement in the lake, but the many cultivators around the lake also widened their eyes in shock. Obviously, they didn't know what had happened. But then, the scene in front of them made them shiver uncontrollably from the bottom of their hearts. They saw that the corpses of the large fish in and out of the water were like clouds of smoke. Now, they were quickly fading and dispersing, disappearing in the blink of an eye. Not only that, but what made them even more frightened was that they found that their memories were actually starting to become blurry. It was as if some invisible force was forcefully erasing some of the remaining traces in their minds. Humph! A cold snort sounded in the sky. The clouds and mist were instantly shattered, revealing the main peak that looked like a miracle under the sunlight. Everyone by the lake lost consciousness at the same time. Subconsciously, they sat cross-legged and pretended to cultivate. A green-faced old man in a long robe appeared by the lake. His eyes swept across the surroundings, and his expression became even more gloomy. "Little lunatic from the academy, what is he doing this time? I want to see how long you can be so arrogant." A lake of goldfish was nothing. If they died, then they died. At most, he would feel a little heartache. However, if the power of the great path erased the memories, it would inevitably hurt the souls of his disciples, which would affect the future great path. This could not be tolerated. But now, although the old man was enraged, he didn't step out to find that little lunatic from the academy and demand an explanation. First, it was difficult to enter and exit that place. Second, even if he went in, he wasn't confident that he could defeat the other party. This made the old man's expression even uglier. He gritted his teeth a few times and angrily left. The moment he disappeared, the people around the lake woke up one after another. No one revealed any abnormalities. After a brief moment of confusion, they cupped their hands together and smiled before standing up and leaving. Their memories had already been quietly erased. Chapter 1580. Marquis Loyal Marshal Ningqin entered the palace on his own initiative to ask His Majesty to bestow him several precious treasures. The reason was that his cultivation had reached a bottleneck and he wanted to borrow external help to break through. He spoke bluntly, and the Western Wasteland Great Emperor agreed with a wave of his hand. However, this matter couldn't be brought out in the open. The Great Emperor didn't use the national crossbow, but instead opened his own treasury and ordered people to take him there. Qin Yu respectfully bowed, his tone filled with gratitude. In truth, he wasn't too moved by this. As the saying goes, if you want a horse to run, you must feed it grass. Since the Western Wasteland Emperor wanted to use him, it wasn't a problem for him to make a few requests. In fact, the more he did this, the more the Western Wasteland Emperor would feel at ease. The eunuch brought Qin Yu to the treasury. In the study, the great emperor sat behind a bead curtain. His eyes flashed, revealing a thoughtful look. Suddenly he said, "What do you think of this golden General Ningqin?" There was no one in the hall, but after the great emperor spoke, a feminine voice sounded out from the shadows in the corner. "If your majesty is willing to trust someone, then he is a good person." The great emperor smiled and shook his head. "Don't flatter me. You aren't good at this, and you are far inferior to the sky-bearing monarch. Just tell me what you feel about him." The shadow fell silent for a moment. Then the feminine voice sounded out once more. "I don't feel anything wrong. Golden General Ningqin is extremely loyal to your majesty. However, this old servant has a feeling that there are still some secrets hidden on this person." The long river sword broke through the Joss flame barrier. Even a peak ruler wouldn't be able to withstand it. All that awaited them was death. How can Golden General Ningqin be unharmed? This is something I can't understand. The great emperor behind the bead curtain nodded. "That's right, this doesn't make sense. But I have confidence that I can control Ningqin. I don't mind him hiding some things in the dark. After all, there are no fish in clear water." He stood up and paced back and forth. Then he shook his head, a helpless smile on his face. "You old fool, you understand me too well. I knew I couldn't hide anything from you." From the shadows a young eunuch walked out. His skin was fair and exquisite, enough to make any woman in this world jealous. His face was soft and gentle, and his temperament was gentle. He chuckled and cupped his hands together. "This old servant is willing to share your majesty's worries." The great sovereign waved his hand. The young eunuch turned around and left. With each step his figure disappeared. The treasury of the imperial palace was of utmost importance. Although this was the private treasury of the great emperor of the West Wilderness, the whole world belonged to him. The value of the things inside could be imagined. The eunuch who brought Chinyu here was the one who had passed the edict. He could be considered to be acquainted with Chinyu, but soon he had other matters to attend to and had no choice but to hurry over. He apologetically apologized to Chinyu, and after Chinyu indicated that it was fine, he smiled and pointed to a young eunuch at his side. He said that this was a junior and that he would lead the marquis into the treasury. Chinyu glanced at the docile and quiet little official. He thought that he was quite handsome, but if he were to change into women's clothes, he might even be called a beauty that could cause the downfall of nations. "Greetings, Marquis." The young eunuch bowed respectfully. Chinyu smiled and nodded. "You already know what this marquis needs. Your Majesty, the treasury is far too large. I will have to trouble you to lead the way." The young eunuch smiled. "Marquis, rest assured that before I left, eunuch already told me the location." The first item was a pitch-black piece of wood. It was the length of an adult's arm, and its surface was covered with fine cracks. It looked very common-looking, like a piece of firewood that hadn't yet been thoroughly burned in a stove. But looking carefully, one could see that between the cracks on the surface of this piece of wood, there were countless tiny arcs of lightning that constantly flashed. In the western wilderness Dragon Terrace County, legends say that there is a place called the Thunderfall Pond. It is a place that can naturally attract divine thunder from the highest heavens, causing it to fall without end. Within this Thunderfall Pond, there is a living verdant tree. This tree is a descendant of the ancient divine tree, the World Tree. It possesses all sorts of mystical abilities and is able to withstand tens of thousands of years of thunder without dying. This piece of wood is a withered branch that fell from the verdant tree. It contains the strength of 10 million strikes of thunder. Compared to this piece of wood, the so-called lightning-struck trees of the world are worse than mud in a mud pit. Chinyu nodded. He could feel the formidable strength contained within this scorched black piece of wood. "Thank you for your explanation, eunuch. This withered branch of the verdant tree does indeed meet my requirements." The young eunuch faintly smiled. He reached out a hand and gestured. "Marquis, please follow me." The treasury was extremely large, and the spells around it were tyrannical. Occasionally, a trace of aura would leak out, causing even Chinyu's heart to race. But the young eunuch in front of him had a calm expression. He didn't know if it was because he was used to this, or if there was some other reason. His thoughts raced, and he immediately suppressed them. The imperial palace was unfathomably deep, and there were crouching tigers and hidden dragons everywhere. As long as it had nothing to do with him, it was best to ignore it to avoid any complications. The second treasure was a cicada's wing. It was as thin as silk, and there was a faint halo of light flowing on its surface, like ripples in water. It was placed in a transparent bubble. The startling cicada's wings originate from a rare and wondrous object in the world. It is hidden deep underground for 3,000 years, breaks its egg at 1,000 years, grows for 1,000 years, and then emerges after 1,000 years. After breaking out of the earth, it can transform into a cicada and soar into the highest heavens, weaving between the heavens and earth. Its speed is faster than lightning, and it can travel 10,000 miles in an instant. The young eunuch smiled as he explained. He lifted a hand and gently touched the bubble. The cicada's wings seemed to be startled. The halo of light on its surface brightened, and then it disappeared. Several breaths of time later, the cicada's wings reappeared, but this time it was in another part of the bubble. This is the special ability of the startling cicada's wings. It can instantly conceal itself and cut off the perception of the world's aura. It can temporarily disappear from this part of the world and then appear somewhere else. This bubble is the remains of a deep-sea jellyfish that has lived for 10,000 years. The inside of it is a world of its own. Thus, it can imprison it within. Otherwise, if it were to disappear and reappear again, in just a few breaths of time it could travel 10,000 miles, 100,000 miles, or even 1,000,000 miles away. It could randomly appear in any corner of this world. Qin Yu looked at the startling cicada's wings. He was silent for a moment. Then he smiled and said, "Eunuch has good insight. I admire you." The young eunuch smiled and didn't explain further. He brought Qin Yu to another part of the inner treasury. The last item is called scarlet blood. He paused and turned to look at Qin Yu. "In truth, I am a bit curious. How did Marquis Zhongwu know of its existence?" Qin Yu thought for a moment. "Can I not answer?" The young eunuch smiled and nodded. He bowed. "Of course, this is the Marquis's right. I am only a bit curious." He no longer spoke. He walked deeper into the inner treasury. Looking at his back, Qin Yu frowned for a moment before composing himself. When the two of them stopped, there was no longer a path in front of them. A lotus root appeared in front of them. It was rooted in the inner treasury. After the roots were supported by array formations and spells, the incomparably hard ground forcefully cracked open. It was as if the entire palace treasury was constantly providing it with nourishment. The few lotus leaves that grew on the lotus root were all green and glistening. The lotus flower in the middle was still in its bud state and had not yet bloomed. The young eunuch pointed a finger. "This lotus flower comes from a fragment from beyond the heavens. It crossed endless space, and when it descended, it was nearly burnt away. The terrifying heat it carried with it instantly evaporated the entire lake, turning it from a blue lake into a land of scarlet for 1,000 miles. But for some unknown reason, there is a lotus seed in this fragment from beyond the heavens that still retains its vitality. No one in the world knows the name or true function of this lotus. They only know that it was born sacred and that it can restrain all demons and ghosts in the world. Thus, it was received into the inner treasury and nourished with the power of the inner treasury's array formations to maintain its growth state. Then, with the help of this lotus flower, it sealed away that scarlet blood. The young eunuch smiled. "As for how this scarlet blood came about and what it involves, I cannot say. I ask for the Marquis's forgiveness." Qin Yu cupped his hands together. "Eunuch has already told me enough. So how could I dare to be dissatisfied? I must thank Eunuch for your honesty." His expression was calm. He looked at the young eunuch in front of him, who didn't reveal his aura, but who knew how deep he was. "I wonder if Eunuch has anything I can help you with?" The young eunuch smiled and bowed. "The Marquis is an intelligent person, so I won't hide anything. What you need to do is simple. You only need to personally break off this lotus flower and bring it out of the inner treasury." Qin Yu thought for a moment and nodded. The young eunuch drew back to the side and gestured with his hand. Qin Yu strode forwards. He reached out a hand and grabbed the neck of the lotus flower. With a bit of strength, he snapped it off and turned around. "Is this enough?" The young eunuch bowed. "Marquis, it is yours now." Qin Yu turned his hand, and the lotus flower vanished from sight. A moment later, the inner treasury was sealed off, and the young eunuch disappeared. The eunuch that had left before ran over. "Servant Wei Ming greets the Marquis." He bowed and wiped away the cold sweat on his forehead. He looked around and didn't see that little brat. He probed. That junior just now is a newcomer to the palace. His luck is good, and he was noticed by His Majesty, so he asked me to look after him. Just now, did he do things properly? If he offended the Marquis in any way, I ask for your forgiveness. In His Majesty's study, Wei Ming was the most successful and outstanding eunuch in the entire imperial palace. He also held the title of Chief Eunuch Commander of the palace. It could be said that his authority was monstrous, and many ministers of the imperial capital had to carefully smile in front of him. This attitude towards Qin Yu wasn't because he had the qualifications to know the top secrets of the Western Wasteland Empire, but because he had a deep understanding of the great emperor and was able to see how highly His Majesty regarded Marquis Zhongwu. No matter how powerful a eunuch was, he was only a dog at His Majesty's side. If he didn't know how to read the situation, sooner or later he would be slaughtered. Qin Yu smiled. "Little eunuch has done very well. I am very satisfied." It seemed that even Wei Ming didn't know the depths of this person. This little eunuch should be a true confidant of the Western Wasteland Great Emperor. As he thought of the previous two that had died in battle with Mr. Zhou, Qin Yu shook his head. They were different. Wei Ming let out a breath of relief. He brightly smiled. "That's good. Marquis, it is that boy's good fortune to be able to come here." He slapped his forehead. "Hey, I almost forgot what I came here for." His Majesty suddenly had some business to attend to, so he ordered me to inform Marquis that there is no need to thank him after you receive the item. You can just return home. Qin Yu cupped his hands together. "I thank His Majesty for his grace. I will take my leave." In the study, after the great emperor received the report, he drank a cup of tea and revealed a helpless expression. "I fear I can't change my personality. I don't even have the face to see Marquis Zhongwu again." Although it wasn't rare for a ruler to go back on his word, several times in such a short period of time was still a bit embarrassing. The little eunuch smiled and bowed. "Your Majesty has the heart of the world in mind. You must be careful in everything you do. This is also how it should be." The great emperor humphed. He sneered. "You really know how to play dumb. I asked you to go and take a look, but I didn't ask you to make a show of yourself." The little eunuch wasn't afraid. He smiled and bowed. "It was my mistake. I will accept my punishment." The great emperor couldn't help but laugh. Then, a bit annoyed, he waved his hand and sent the eunuch away. The little eunuch bowed and drew back to the side. His figure melted into the shadows and he vanished from sight. At this time, the great emperor's voice suddenly sounded out. "Go and investigate Nine-Tailed's tracks and report back to me." "Yes, Your Majesty." In terms of geographical location, Sigay City was still a very, very long distance from the imperial capital. Even a powerful cultivator would need to spend a great deal of time to cross such a vast territory. But as one of the 108 main cities, the transmission array was connected to the imperial capital. As long as one obtained permission, they could directly enter the capital region. From this point of view, it was naturally very close. In the Western Wasteland's imperial capital, the stone bridge had already been reduced to ashes, let alone Sigay City. Even in a peaceful world, there were still many flies and dogs lurking around. If someone died, that was a completely normal matter. The city lord mansion wouldn't even bat an eyelid at this. But as the Wutong Commandery's Li family's letter arrived at Sigay City first, the wily and far-sighted Lord City Lord felt his head explode. The death of someone was a small matter, but also depended on who died. Who knew which Li Cangzhou was? But since he could incite the Wudong commandery's Li family to fly into a rage, this matter would be blown out of proportion. At the first moment, Chen Yuanqin reported to the imperial palace to inform His Majesty of this matter. But before the imperial palace gave a response, 3 people from the Wudong commandery's Li family had already arrived at Sigay City. Although the family head, Li Qinghao, didn't come personally, the leader of the Li family was an old ancestor who had been in seclusion for many years. His aura was obscure and deep like the sea. Although Chen Yuanqin wasn't worried that the other party would attack him, beads of sweat still appeared on his forehead as he respectfully welcomed them into the City Lord Mansion. City Lord Qin, although my grandson's talent is average, I watched him grow up. Now that he has been harmed by a thief, I must find the true culprit and take revenge for him. Otherwise, I will be ashamed to face his parents who have passed away long ago. Old ancestor Li spoke slowly, his voice calm but full of pressure. Chen Yuanqin said in a low voice, "Rest assured, old ancestor. Since this happened in my Sigay city, I will find the culprit even if I have to dig 3 feet into the ground to give you an explanation." The Chen family's group was placed in the most exquisite guest courtyard of the City Lord Mansion. The doors closed. Old ancestor Li, who was walking in front, turned around and respectfully bowed. "Two little ancestors, Zicheng has offended you." Li Gu stood up, his face expressionless. Li Ruhua smiled and waved her hand. "We already agreed on this. There's no need to mind it." She swept her eyes around. "Li Zicheng, you stay here. We're going out for a walk." "Two little ancestors, please go ahead." Li Gu lifted a hand and slashed forwards. Space quietly split open, and he and Li Gu stepped inside. Space closed up and disappeared. This move left old ancestor Li sighing with emotion. In terms of cultivation, he was a bit stronger, but disregarding everything else, just this technique of breaking through the world was something he absolutely couldn't accomplish. Although the sword in little ancestor Li Ji's hand wasn't clear, its might was enough to make one's heart race. It was really enviable. Shua, in Sigay City, outside a lake, Li Gu and Li Ruhua's figures appeared. Several small courtyards were scattered around the lakeside. It was already late, and lights could be seen in the distance. Li Ruhua looked around. She frowned imperceptibly before immediately composing herself. "That's right, that person died here," Li Gu lightly said. "For better or worse, the Wudong commandery's Li family is close to our bloodline. The spells used in the ancestral shrine should also be of the same bloodline. If the other party was able to delay for several days after killing someone before revealing this matter, then it isn't an ordinary method." Li Ruhua smiled. "We just need to be careful, but I hope that the culprit will directly jump in front of us." Li Gu didn't speak. His expression was calm. He was extremely confident in the sword in his hand. Chapter 1581. Under the willow by the lake, a cool breeze caressed her face. Li Ruhua closed her eyes, her mind sensing the remnant aura of this world. Li Gu stood there holding his sword. His expression was calm, but a bright light flashed in his eyes. All of a sudden, the cool breeze became turbulent, and then it became chaotic. Li Gu turned his head and looked over. He frowned and revealed a serious expression. After several breaths of time, Li Ruhua opened her eyes. Her face was pale and tired. She slowly said, "Li Cangzhou did die here, but the murder's aura was messed up by someone with a great magical ability. I tried to trace it back, but all I found was chaos." As she said this, she couldn't help but raise her hand and rub her eyebrows to reduce the soreness and discomfort. Li Ji's expression was solemn. Li Ruhua was born with a magical ability and was the focus of the family's nurturing. The two of them worked together, but they were also competitors. Thus, he had some understanding of Li Ruhua's abilities. Even she couldn't sense any clues The person who messed up the aura must be extremely strong. Looking at each other, the two Li family little ancestors from the central wasteland divine continent could sense each other's surprise. Before, in front of Li Qinghao, they had mentioned the nine-tailed demon fox that had appeared in the imperial capital. That was just an excuse. It was hasty and crude. Thinking about it, the seemingly timid but incomparably shrewd Li family head had already sensed it. But looking at it again, things had become very strange. To be able to use a great magical ability to mess up the aura and seal off Li Ruhua's detection. Was this person really not related to the nine-tailed demon fox in the imperial capital? Moreover, the murdered Li Cangzhou was a member of the Wudong Commandery's Li family. In the Western Wasteland Empire, if there was no karma, why would anyone casually kill him? And his background was unfathomable. Who are you? With a low shout, two patrolling guards saw the two people by the lake. There were several courtyards next to the small lake in the building. Arrangements had been made in advance for the daily guests they received. Now that two unfamiliar faces had appeared, the guards were naturally alarmed and angry. If they had ill intentions and came for a certain guest, they would not be able to absolve themselves from the blame if something went wrong. But soon, the two guards no longer had to worry about this. A sword light slashed out and two heads rolled off. As blood sprayed out, the two Li family little ancestors had already turned and left. The descending moon was instantly thrown into chaos. The steward, who had a deep background and was on friendly terms with the city lord's residents, clenched his teeth with an ashen face. On one hand, he did his best to appease the guests, while on the other, he clamored that there must be an explanation for today's matter. But the result was that nothing was done. The city lord's mansion knew of the murder in Linyu Tower, but did nothing. This silence caused the heart of the manager of the Descending Moon Pavilion to palpitate. Following that, a great sense of unease grew within him, and he did not dare to continue making a fuss. After all, as he had said before, everyone was different. If he died, then so be it. Chun Yuanshan took a sip of tea and smiled bitterly. Although there was no evidence, Su Shin had seen the residual sword intent of killing people. So far, it was still so fierce that he felt frightened at a glance. Who else could it be? Zichin, the old ancestor said. Chun, Li, the young man, he. Chun and Li said, he ancestor, Li and he. Changfeng, Li he, Li he. He closed his eyes and continued to cultivate. If it weren't for the fact that these two central, desolate family little ancestors represented a turning point for him to break through in the future, it would have been impossible for him to appear here. When one's cultivation reached this step, everything else was fleeting. Climbing up the great Tao was the most important matter. Li Gu closed the door and drew his sword an inch. With a sword cry, the aura in the room was cut apart and sealed away. He looked up at Li Ruhua. It looks like we will have to make a trip to the western, desolate imperial capital. Before this, when she used her supernatural ability to sense, it was indeed chaotic fragments. But she was still able to lock onto a trace of an indescribable aura. And that direction was the imperial capital. Little Meaty was inspecting the 3 treasures that Qin Yu had brought back from the imperial palace's treasury. A withered branch of the greenwood. It had withstood the bombardment of countless bolts of thunder. It could be considered the world's highest-level thunderstruck wood. Startling cicada wings, a wondrous object of the heavens and earth. A cicada that could soar into the highest heavens after 300 years, a wing that was left behind after being hunted. Scarlet blood, unknown origin. It was wrapped and sealed by a lotus bud. Not bad, they can all be considered good things. And besides that, there are also unexpected harvests. Little Meaty flicked the shell of the 10,000-year jellyfish. As she watched the startling cicada wings disappear, it slowly reappeared. This shell has the effect of isolating itself from the world. After refining it, you can obtain a treasure that can conceal your aura. She looked at Qin Yu. However, the most precious of all is this lotus flower. If you are willing to trade it to me, I can erase 1/3 of your remaining debt. Qin Yu thought for a moment and came to a conclusion. This lotus flower in front of him was worth 1/6 of a joss flame child. His eyes brightened. What is its use? Little Meaty said, refine it into the divine soul, making it impervious to all evils. She tapped her fingers together and looked at the stump of the lotus bud. She smiled and said, of course, if you can take out the entire lotus flower and erase all of your debts, there might still be some left over. Qin Yu thought for a moment and then shook his head without hesitation. Let alone the imperial palace's treasury, even if it was placed on the side of the road, no one would dare to touch it. Otherwise, did they really think that the great emperor above the 9th level in the imperial palace was a clay bodhisattva? Little Meaty curled her lips and didn't say anything more. I'll leave the scarlet blood for you. Since the excuse is to break through to the next realm, you should at least put on an act. Moreover, your current level is indeed a bit lacking. As for the startling cicada wings and the jellyfish shell, I've thought about it. I can help you refine them into a treasure, but you must know that my fee isn't low. She lifted a hand and pointed at the thunderstruck wood. This pitch-black thing will be my reward. Qin Yu nodded without hesitation. All right, then, I will trade the refined treasure to you in exchange for arranging the Joss Flame Child. Cough! But you must temporarily rent this treasure to me for a period of time. Don't worry, I will definitely pay an additional price. Little Meaty covered her face with her hands and let out a pained groan. She felt that the current Qin Yu was becoming less and less adorable. The strength of his shamelessness was truly changing with each passing day. It was advancing by leaps and bounds. Seawatch City urgently submitted a memorial. Wudong County's Li family old ancestor had arrived with 2 juniors to search for the murderer of the Li family's juniors. Then, just a day later, another urgent memorial was sent to the imperial palace. Old ancestor Li was bringing 2 juniors with him to the imperial capital. In the memorial, there was a helpless and bitter mention. Because of old ancestor Li's insistence, his son Qin Shanglu was accompanying him. Behind the bead curtain, the great emperor laid down the memorial. A cold light flashed in his eyes. In the shadows of the study, there was a light sigh. In these past years, Qin Yuanqin hadn't been too smart. Today he had made another bad move. There was no way out for him in the future. Humph, you old fool. Don't think you can be so insolent just because I trust you. The great emperor angrily roared. A soft and feminine voice sounded out. I don't dare. Your Majesty, please calm your anger. I just feel that this Qin Yuanqin has failed to live up to your trust. He is far too stupid. The great emperor snorted coldly. Since Li Zicheng has personally appeared, the 2 people behind him must be from the Li family of the Middle Baron region. I want to know why these people have come to the capital of the Western Baron region. He lowered his head and looked down from above. In the shadows, an illusory figure appeared and bowed. I am investigating, but the aura of that 9-tailed demon fox has completely disappeared. I think it must have used some external object to conceal itself. I only want results. Yes. In a private residence, young Master Min Xiangtai's recent performance made everyone in the residence, including the old master, extremely happy. Not only did he not spend a lot of money to go to the brothel, but he also picked up a book and studied hard in the study every day. Of course, the old master was very clear about his youngest son's personality. How could he easily believe him? But after many observations, the conclusion he came to was the same. Min Xiangtai seemed to have suddenly become enlightened. In the world of cultivators where demons and ghosts coexisted, there was no lack of strange things. The old master's expression changed. He gritted his teeth and called for the housekeeper. Late at night, Min Xiangtai's courtyard door was opened again. He was directly dragged out of his bed by 2 red-clothed men. He shouted, "Father, what are you doing?" and poured a whole night of black dog blood into his mouth. Although the pitiful young master had some foundation in cultivation, he was still like a weak girl in the hands of the two burly men. He could only be wantonly played with without the slightest ability to resist. Following behind the old master was an old celestial master dressed in a bright yellow robe. He held a talisman in his hand and slapped it heavily on the forehead of Min Xiangtai, who was vomiting dog blood all over his body. "Hey, evil creature, you still don't want to show yourself?" He formed a seal with his hand, and the talisman ignited without any fire. Then it lit up Min Xiangtai's hair. It was quite a lively scene. When everyone finally managed to extinguish the flames, the pitiful Min Xiangtai, who was originally elegant and graceful, had become a greenish-purple pighead that had been scorched by the smoke and punched and kicked. It was truly a tragic sight to behold. After pouring water on him and pinching his philtrum, Min Xiangtai woke up after a long time. He cried out, "Father, my dear father, just what do you want to do?" This voice, this gaze, there was no mistaking it. This was definitely his own son. The old master let out a long breath. Then there was a moment of awkwardness. The old madam rushed over upon hearing the news. She hugged Min Xiangtai and cried out, "My poor child!" Then she couldn't help but turn around and grab the old master. With a series of scratching techniques, she began to make a scene on the spot. After saying, "Ancestors, bless me, my son has truly become enlightened," the old master laughed heartily as he ran away like a rat. After a moment, the courtyard was finally restored to tranquility. After using the old celestial master's ointment, the bruises on Min Xiangtai's face had greatly subsided. After sending away the two nearby study maids that served him, Min Xiangtai sat behind his desk and covered his face with his hands. He really didn't have the face to see anyone. A light chuckle suddenly echoed in his ears. Little young master's father is truly a wonderful person. He had intruded twice at night, both on full moons and at exactly the right time. If one were to say it was a coincidence, then it was far too much of a coincidence, but then again, this was normal. After all, how could an ordinary family casually hide the heaven-shrouding book that could hide a great monster in their study? Wasn't that the most wonderful thing about it? Wonderful to the point that even she, a nine-tailed monster fox, couldn't sense the aura of this old master. Min Xiangtai thought that the fairy maiden was teasing him. His face flushed red, and he cupped his hands together. "Fairy maiden, please don't poke my face." The woman faintly smiled and didn't say anything. Since he was a wonderful person, then she would mind her own business and mind her own business. She yawned and looked at Min Xiangtai, who had a nervous expression and a burning passion in his eyes. "Little young master, I am very tired. I won't be accompanying you tonight." She turned around and melted into the book like smoke, vanishing from sight. Chapter 1582. In recent years, the biggest joke of Siwatch City was Chen Shanglu. This young master of the city, Lord Manor, had an extremely noble status. He was one of the most distinguished figures in the city. But his mistake was that he had offended someone he shouldn't have offended. Back in the descending moon pavilion, the conflict had shaken the entire city. Of course, this wasn't a secret. As time passed, people heard a few words about what they shouldn't know. If that General Jin Wu was just a nameless nobody, then it would have been fine. But after he entered the capital, he had a great stroke of luck. One after another, without giving people too much time to digest, he had become a third-class Marquis Zhongwu, a great general of the same rank. It was clear that in front of His Majesty, he was a very popular person. In comparison, Chen Shanglu, the elegant gentleman, was the real clown. In particular, not long ago, when Marquis Zhongwu received the emperor's order to report to the capital, the city lord Qin Yuanshin personally came forward and brought Chen Shanglu to apologize. His father had broken his leg and caused Deputy General Su Xin to lose his arm. In the end, they couldn't turn hostility into friendship and parted on bad terms. The more His Majesty valued Marquis Zhongwu, the more awkward Chen Shanglu's position as the city lord of Sea-Watch City would be. The connections involved could be seen if one thought about it. Thus, in Sea-Watch City, it seemed like everything was calm and peaceful. But underneath this calm, there were countless undercurrents surging. The territory of the Western Wilderness was vast, but there were only 108 main cities, which implied some kind of heavenly Tao. Being the lord of a city not only meant status and power, but also the imperceptible blessing of the great Tao, which was of great help to cultivation. Such a position naturally attracted many people, over and over again, with all sorts of karma superimposed. Qin Shanglu became a drunkard in the mansion who was always drunk. One day he was drunk again. As he chased after several maids, he seemed to see someone as beautiful as a fairy. Qin Shanglu laughed as he rushed forward. He seemed to hear his father's angry scolding. His drunkenness slightly dissipated, but he didn't stop. Instead, his laughter became even more wanton. A sweet fragrance entered his nose, but before he could truly embrace the beauty in front of him, his vision turned black and he fell unconscious. He was in a daze for an unknown period of time, and when he woke up he found himself in a moving carriage. "You're awake." She didn't open her eyes, but she seemed to know everything. Qin Shanglu raised his hand and rubbed his sore glabella. He struggled to sit up and said in a deep voice, "Who are you? Where am I?" The woman's eyes were still closed. "Don't worry, you weren't kidnapped. Chun Yuanshin personally promised to let you leave with us. Then this is the Western Wasteland Imperial City." Chen Shangul's pupils shrank, and he seriously looked at the woman in front of him. He stood up and respectfully bowed. Qin Shangul had no intention of offending Fairy Maidenly. "I ask Fairy Maiden to forgive me." The woman let out a deep breath. She opened her eyes and looked at him, a smile on her face. "Sir Qin is truly intelligent, but as a man, if you give up on yourself after such a small setback, you are simply too weak." Chen Shanglu laughed self-deprecatingly. "Fairy is right." His eyes were a little dim. He shook his head and said, "Why did you bring me to the capital?" Li Ruhua smiled brightly. "Young master, please lead the way." She looked at Chen Shangul in front of her, but she wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the entangled karmic aura behind him. That day at the City Lord Mansion, it was because of this that Chen Shangul was able to live to this day. Otherwise, Li Ji's sword would have taught him that there were some women in this world that you could never touch. However, Li Guo wasn't here, and there were only her and Qin Shangul in the carriage. It was hard to say what this meant. Qin Shangul hesitated for a moment. He cupped his hands together and said, "It's good that I can help Fairy Maiden." He sat down cross-legged and closed his eyes to rest. Li Ruhua was startled. Then she smiled and looked at him with a bit more interest in her eyes. She looked away and closed her eyes once more, a smile on her face. He had clearly come from the broken world of the southwest desolate region. Not long after entering the desolate region, he had met with fate and obtained his current status. This was even more interesting. A moment later, the carriage stopped. Li Ruhua reached out and lifted the curtains, looking outside. Qinyu, who was addicted to renting, was chased out by Little Meaty. When this fellow became slippery, his skin was truly thick. But she couldn't help but admit that this could be considered an unorthodox path. If she closed one eye, there was indeed room for manipulation. After all, in the countless years she had lived, she had never done this with anyone. Most of the time it was a one-time deal. This was because the vast majority of those who traded with her only had a single chance. Of course, the premise of all of this was that Meaty was willing. Otherwise, would it be anyone else who tried it? Humph, humph. Did they really think that their jade-like hands couldn't be clasped between two fingers, so that their brains would splatter everywhere? But she still had to put on an act. Otherwise, little Qin would definitely reach for a yard after taking an inch. If he really touched her bottom line one day, should she kill him or not? So, intermittently giving him a bit of warning was good, for both herself and the other. And at this time, Meaty was using the jellyfish shell and startling cicada wings as materials to refine a very interesting treasure. She flicked her fingers, and layers of fluctuations splashed out in the void. As these fluctuations collided with each other, they drew out the phantom of a great furnace. The jellyfish shell and startling cicada wings floated in this great furnace phantom, already in a half-melted state. Faint traces of mysterious energy flowed around them. She could casually forge an ordinary artifact. However, firstly, the materials used were pretty good. Secondly, once this artifact was forged, even if it was hers, although she felt a little strange, little Meaty still felt that she should forge this artifact to perfection. Thus, she had used a little trick to borrow this furnace from someone. Although it was only a shadow and didn't even have a tenth of the true body strength, it was more than enough to refine these two items. At this time, Meaty suddenly frowned. She looked up, a cold chill surging in the depths of her eyes. Someone was using the path of karma to investigate matters involving Chinyu. Her first thought was that the cover-up she had made before had already been seen through. If this was true, then there would surely be a great battle. Even she would find herself in great trouble. But soon, Meaty's complexion relaxed a little. Although someone had indeed come looking for her, things weren't as bad as they seemed. She looked at the great furnace phantom in front of her that was refining something. Her lips curved up in a smile, and she lifted a hand. Hum! The cauldron trembled slightly, and a faint buzzing sound came from within. It was as if a child was hitting the cauldron with a stick, causing it to tremble. With a stuffy cough, Li Ruhua paled and shock filled her eyes. She ignored Qin Shangolv and said, "Let's go." The carriage sped away. As they left the street, Li Ruhua spat out a mouthful of blood, but her complexion actually improved. She was indeed fierce. Outside the loyal Marshal Marquis mansion, she had used supernatural abilities to trace back karma. But before she could make any harvests, she had been forced back by the loud sound of a bell. If it weren't for the fact that the loud sound had only forced her to retreat and had no intention of pursuing the matter, the consequences wouldn't have been as simple as spitting out a mouthful of blood. Li Ruhua wiped the blood from the corners of her lips and turned around. She looked in the direction of the loyal Marshal Marquis mansion, and a sharp light flashed in her eyes. Chen Shangolv suddenly said, "Fairy maiden, did you come here because it involves the loyal Marshal Marquis Ningqin?" Li Ruhua glanced at him. She shouldn't have said these things to a mere traveler, but at this time her thoughts stirred. She smiled and nodded yes. Chen Shangolv cupped his hands together. "If there is anything I can help you with, Fairy Maiden, please feel free to ask." He didn't conceal his resentment towards the loyal Marshal Marquis. Li Ruhua smiled. "All right." She looked away. She spread out her fingers and looked at a red spot on her palm. Space trembled and fluctuated. The furnace phantom appeared. At this time it let out a light sigh. "Sir, I am willing to lend you a furnace projection to help you refine something. But I didn't want to be infected with such great karma." A voice sounded out in the room. Little Meaty had a calm expression. It was clear she had already expected this. She giggled. "We are old friends, so don't be so stingy. If I had a choice, I would rather not have my friendship with you." Her voice was calm, but there was a trace of sorrow and loneliness. After a brief silence, she continued to say, "After this, the final favor I owed you in the past will be written off. There will no longer be any connection between us." Little Meaty nodded. "Whatever you say." "Thank you." The furnace phantom returned to silence. The loyal Marshal Marquis Ningqin had announced to the outside world that he would be going into seclusion. But this wasn't just an excuse. He was truly beginning to cultivate. Since he already had the opportunity to openly enter the imperial palace treasury, wouldn't he be mocking the great emperor's intelligence if he didn't hurry up and go into seclusion? It was obvious that there was a huge problem. Moreover, Qinyu's current boundary had indeed reached a bottleneck. It was time to take another step forwards. Otherwise, in today's social circle, everyone was a big shot. Although there was meat behind them, at the end of the day, they had to be strong themselves to be truly worry-free. What was scarlet blood? Little Meaty did not explain, and the little eunuchs of the imperial palace also said that they could not speak of it. No matter how he thought about it, Little Meat didn't have any motive to harm him. Then let's eat. He opened his mouth and swallowed, and the lotus bud went straight into his stomach. This was Little Meaty's suggestion. She said that the effects were the best. At most, they would suffer a little, but compared to the benefits, it was negligible. Although Chinyu was already mentally prepared and only believed 30% of Little Meaty's words, he soon discovered that even 30% was too much. A terrifying burning sensation was released from his chest and abdomen, as though his entire body was burning. He was placed into the billowing waves of fire in the alchemy furnace. From the inside out, whether it was every inch of his flesh and blood, or even his soul itself, everything was placed within, withstanding the pain of a pot of boiling oil. Luckily, there was still the lotus flower that he swallowed into his stomach. As the scarlet blood dissipated, it released a cool aura that protected Chinyu's last shred of consciousness. Otherwise, he feared he wouldn't be able to withstand it for even a moment before fainting, causing all of his efforts to be wasted. To Chinyu, this was certainly a good thing. But on the other hand, it was because his consciousness was clear that he could clearly feel every pain he was experiencing. This feeling was so sour that it couldn't be any better. Little Meaty, consider yourself ruthless. Just you wait. I, Chin, won't settle accounts with you in the future. The old master of the residence was a respectable person. His family was wealthy, and he was always kind and charitable. In the surrounding neighborhoods, he had a good reputation. Although he was a little bit lecherous, but no one was perfect, right? We had to have a tolerant heart. Not long after the 9th sun rose, the residence's side door opened. The old master, who was used to waking up early to take a stroll, pushed open the door and walked out. Yo, I've run into you. Morning, morning. I'll be here in a bit. Same old place, same old rules. As he greeted others, the old master began to stroll. This was an unchanging rule that he followed every day, and the surrounding residents were already well aware of it. In addition, although the old master's eyes were often lecherous, and he often found it hard to move his legs when he saw beautiful young women, he had never had a bad reputation. As time passed, people no longer cared about it. So what if he looked at him twice? It wasn't as if he would lose his flesh. There were even some shrewd women who would throw flirtatious glances at him on their own initiative. The old master immediately gulped and then lowered his head as he walked past. He muttered to himself, "A gentleman moves his eyes, but not his hands. A gentleman moves his eyes, but not his hands." As he got closer, he could even hear it. As it spread out, it became a joke that wasn't too big or too small. As usual, he walked a circle around the residence. The time he took wasn't too long or too short. It just happened to be an hour. At this time, the 9th sun was a bit higher and there were more people walking on the streets. The old master arrived at his usual breakfast shop not too far from his home. "Old master, here is your seat. Your steamed buns and tea have just been prepared for you. Eat it while it's hot." The shopkeeper greeted him with a smile and a respectful tone. Behind him hid a 17 or 18-year-old girl. Her black hair was combed into a large braid, and her eyes were evasive, not daring to show her face. The old master smacked his lips. This little girl is almost 18 this year, right? Time really flies. In the blink of an eye, she's already a big girl. Someone jeered. "Old master, you are a person of virtue and prestige. You have personally seen this little girl grow from a bean sprout to this young lady. You wouldn't have any other thoughts, right?" A burst of laughter rang out. The black-haired girl's face flushed red, but she wasn't embarrassed or angry. She was already used to it. Especially in these past 2 years, after her body was fully developed, the old master's eyes would linger for a bit. He would do this almost every day. The shopkeeper laughed as he watched, not angry at all. It was as if the old master asked, he would really let his daughter enter the mansion and become a concubine. The old master laughed and scolded. Such delicious steamed buns can't even stuff your mouth. Another burst of laughter rang out. But today there was something strange. The old master, who had only eaten half of his breakfast, suddenly stood up and left in a hurry. What is it? Could it be that the old master really has some thoughts? But now that we've seen through him, you don't have the face to stay? A man laughed, but this time he didn't receive any response. The customers in the breakfast shop all looked at him. Their gaze is not gentle at all. The smile on the man's face slowly faded away, replaced by a dark and vicious expression. The shopkeeper walked over and placed down a basket of steamed buns. This is for the customer. This meal is on me. But the following words caused the man's slightly relaxed expression to turn incomparably ugly. This lowly one's family once encountered a calamity. Thanks to the old master's rescue, we were able to live peacefully until today. So, please don't come here again in the future. I have truly troubled you. The man fiercely slammed the table. But at this time, a chill rose from the depths of his heart. He looked at the old shopkeeper in front of him, who had a kind smile and was slightly bowing. He clenched his teeth and used the last of his courage to throw down a silver coin. "I'll pay the bill." He stood up and left, his back in a distressed state. Where did this poor fellow come from? Why didn't he ask around? Do you think our old master's reputation is something that he can mock? We were joking around because of our many years of friendship. No one took it seriously, but this man is really annoying. Boss, you did well. If he had dared to cause trouble just now, my son would have taken up a position in the imperial garrison and made him suffer the consequences. The shopkeeper laughed as he listened. He returned to the back of the stall and continued to make steamed buns. Mist rose up and covered his face, completely concealing the worry in his eyes as he looked at the old master's house. Chapter 1583. The general guarding the city gates, Yuan Iba, was drunk from drinking last night. He was supported by his subordinates and brought back to his own courtyard. In the middle of the night, there was a creaking sound as the door opened. There was a rustling sound as a soft body slid in from his blankets. In his sleep, he muttered some gibberish that could not be heard clearly. General Yuan turned around and explored the valley with his hands. Then he flicked himself up and felt extremely happy. It was as if he was galloping on the battlefield. His life was very satisfying and complete. Galloping and galloping, the bed creaked through the night. When the sky brightened and the room began to brighten, Yuan Iba looked at the woman in his arms and his mouth twitched. "Oh no, no. Drinking will ruin me." He stood up and put on his clothes. No matter how loud the shouts from behind him, he didn't even turn his head. Just as he opened the courtyard doors and took a few steps, someone chased after him. It was one of his trusted aides. He smiled and gave him a thumbs up. General is as vigorous as a dragon and as fierce as a tiger. Even this lowly one couldn't sleep for half a night. You are truly amazing. Yuan Iba was embarrassed at first, but then he became extremely annoyed. He turned around with a smile on his face. "In 2 days, I will give you a prescription to strengthen your foundation. After you drink it, you will also be as vigorous as you are now." With a smiling face, he cursed in his heart. What a traitor! This general thought that you wanted to let me have a taste of that charming little wife of his. But who would have thought that you would actually take advantage of the darkness of the night to send your own little sister over? Why don't you take a piss and look at yourself in the mirror? If I knew it was your little sister, I would have turned around and left. Whoever came was just a bastard. After sending this brat away, Yuan Iba quickly walked away as he thought about how he would deal with this bastard in the future. This was the so-called playing to someone's liking, but instead kicking the horse's leg. This should be it. As he turned a corner, the light of the 9 suns shined on his face. Yuan Eba subconsciously narrowed his eyes, feeling a bit dizzy. After a moment, his body shivered and Yuan Eba regained his composure. His eyes widened and he looked around in panic. On the long street, there were many people coming and going. However, there were several pedestrians that were attracted by his movements, revealing puzzled expressions. Yuan Eba walked away with his head lowered. After he was far away, Yuan Eba raised his hand and wiped the cold sweat off his forehead. Although he was just a city gate guard who had been stuck in his original position for many years and hadn't been promoted for many years, he had lived for a long time and had seen some things. Just now, everything seemed normal, but he felt that there was another story hidden in that daze. However, no matter how he tried to think back, he could only see a blank space in front of him. Something must have happened. But I'm just a small city gate guard. In the big pond that is the imperial capital, I'm at most a little tortoise the size of a fingernail. How is it worth spending so much effort? The more he thought about it, the more panicked he became. His face turned pale, and cold sweat dripped down his forehead. All of a sudden, a chuckle echoed in his ears. General Yuan, there's no need to panic. I'm here to confirm one thing. Next, I might need your cooperation. I advise you to tell me the truth. Otherwise, there will be trouble. With a thud, Yuan Eba squatted on the ground and stared at the shadow beneath his feet. That's right, it was the one who had spoken just now, but its voice was that of a woman sweet and sweet. Gulp. Yuan Eba swallowed a mouthful of saliva as he felt his ears ringing and his vision turning black. They found the city gate guard Yuan Eba as a breakthrough point. In addition, that person didn't intentionally hide his whereabouts. Soon, they were able to follow the clues and lock onto Zhongwu Marquis Manor. It really was that place. Li Ruhua narrowed her eyes. She waved her hand for everyone to leave. Although the central wasteland divine continent was high and lofty, they still had to make arrangements in advance for the surrounding empires. As one of the top families in the central wasteland, the Li family naturally had some preparations. Now that they had used it a little, it was more than enough to investigate some information. When they heard that Li Sangzhou had been killed, they were moved. When they arrived at Sea Viewing City, they discovered the karma on Chen Shenglu's body. When they spied on Zhongwu Marquis Manor, they were forced to retreat with a warning. In addition, after confirming that Li Sangzhou had died, someone had borrowed his body and taken him to Zhongwu Marquis Manor. Connecting all of this together, all of the clues pointed towards Zhongwu Marquis Ningqin. Li Ge was expressionless. His eyes were solemn. He slowly said, I feel that things are going a bit too smoothly. After a brief pause, he glanced at her. I don't doubt your judgment, but things are indeed as they are. Li Ruhua nodded. I know what you mean. We need to be cautious, lest we fall into a trap. When the new barbarian sovereign was born, for some unknown reason, his aura was isolated. Even the 13th tower couldn't lock onto him. Just thinking about the methods involved was enough to make one's heart tremble. It was inconceivable. This time, the top families of the central wasteland divine continent had been ordered by the 13th tower to search for the barbarian sovereign. This was not an ordinary matter. So, for clues and suspects to be delivered to them, so easily made them feel uneasy. We have to try. What if it is him? Li Ruhua slowly said, her eyes bright. Even if he isn't, there is still a trace of aura on General Jinwu's body. This means that there must be some connection between him and the barbarian sovereign. Li Ge thought for a moment. He nodded. All right, but we must be careful. Of course. After all, we are here to investigate the cause of Wudong Commandery's, Li Sangzhou's death. There is also Li Zicheng ahead of us. Li Ruhua smiled. He was only a branch bloodline. If he could be used as a shield or a chess piece in a critical situation, she wouldn't be lenient. Li Ge stood up. Then let Li Zicheng make a trip to the Imperial Palace as soon as possible. General Jinwu is currently a chess piece of the Western Wasteland Great Emperor. This is the Western Wasteland Imperial Capital. We cannot be too rude to the great emperor of a country. Trouble hadn't completely left. Without evidence, one could only rely on intuition. But Meaty's intuition was even more accurate than evidence. This didn't make sense. Of course, there were some existences in this world that were unreasonable to begin with. Otherwise, why would the world itself be able to suppress her, but still be unable to take another step forward? She no longer needed to look after the furnace projection in the shaking space. Since that person agreed to lend it to her, she didn't need to worry about any problems occurring. Otherwise, the two of them had just settled their old debts. Humph, humph. She paced back and forth, glancing at the area where Chinyu was in seclusion. Hiss! Little Chinyu's patience was quite good. He had lasted until now and hadn't fainted yet. He had suffered a bit too much this time. But as the saying went, only those who suffered the most hardship could rise above others. She was doing this for his own good. Chin, you would definitely be able to understand her good intentions, right? Cough, cough. Inexplicably, she felt a bit guilty. Meaty rubbed her nose. She suddenly felt that this action was similar to Chinyu's, and a look of disgust crossed her face. This brat, she hated him just by looking at him. Unknowingly, he had infected her with his bad habits. How hateful! She might as well ignore this matter and let him suffer a bit. That way, he wouldn't grow arrogant and complacent after everything went smoothly for him. Meaty cried out. She took a step forwards and vanished. When she reappeared, she was atop a roof. She looked up towards a distant region of the imperial capital. Her eyes brightened, revealing a bit of surprise. How fierce! Although my current state isn't good, I was still able to hide right under my eyes for so long. If I didn't reveal my aura on my own initiative, I wouldn't have been able to sense it at all. Oh, so there is an array formation that borrows the smoke and fire of the world to conceal itself. This method isn't ordinary at all. No wonder I was able to live so peacefully in the Western Wastelands, imperial capital, for so many years. Meaty subconsciously rubbed her chin. But at this time, she didn't realize that this action was also very familiar. Perhaps she could use this to make a fuss. If she handled it properly, not only would this trouble be solved, but she could even further clear Chinyu's name. Otherwise, if her identity was really discovered, then once those idiots on the 13th floor went crazy, it would be very troublesome. As her thoughts raced, Meaty revealed a faint smile. But soon, this smile froze at the corners of her lips. I am an extremely mysterious almighty being that hides within space and time. My might is unfathomable. I trade with all living beings and earn their lives and even their souls. From the start, it has always been me standing on a divine altar, looking down upon those pitiful worms that are struggling. When did I become like this? This just why. Meaty felt a sense of loss. She began to become listless and listless. She sat on the eaves, leaning back and basking in the warm sunlight. She gently tapped her fingers against the tiles. After a while, her fingers froze. She grabbed her head with both hands and rolled back and forth with an anguished wail. In the distance, a chicken that was curled up in the arms of a maid and rubbing its soft chest suddenly shivered. It looked up at the eaves and saw that the great Demon King was in a strange state. It flapped its wings and flew away, turning tail and running away. But in a flash, when the chicken overlord regained its composure, it discovered that it was already in someone's arms. Although there was more flesh on her chest, and it was also softer and more comfortable, it didn't dare to move. It obediently shivered, its eyes wide with sorrow. It wanted to cry, but no tears came out. Why was it always me that was injured? I was just taking a stroll, and yet I encountered the great Demon King going crazy. Moreover, if you don't feel well, then go look for that fellow Chinyu. Why is he always using his demonic palms on such a handsome and cute little chicken? After all, the borrowed skin couldn't last long. After leaving the imperial capital, he went through 2 more teleportations and left the core area of the West Wilderness. Then he changed his clothes. His reputation couldn't compare with that of Wudong County's Lee family, but he could still be considered clean and had a bit of a reputation. He smoothly entered the border. After changing his clothes, he became a scout of the western wilderness. Like a fish returning to the sea, he drilled into the savage western territory, disappearing without a trace. Several days later, an unremarkable scout had been killed in the western border army camp. This sort of matter occurred nearly every day, so it naturally wouldn't arouse any suspicions. Then, without stopping, this fellow who had been immersed in hurrying along was exhausted several times. He couldn't help but raise his head and think to himself, why didn't the great which also build some transmission arrays within the borders of our barbarians? Hurrying along is just too difficult. Just as this thought appeared, the space around him twisted and a boundless grasping force wrapped around him. Ah, great witch, I was wrong. Please don't lower yourself to my level. There was a series of distortions. When his field of vision stabilized, cold winds howled in the air, sweeping up countless snowflakes.